Well, this was an assignment. This was my first studio feature. It was offered to me, and I thought, I can't turn this down. But I was not anxious to remake this movie. So my idea was to make it as true to our time in the 80s as Hawks was to his time in the 50s.
U.S. number 31 calling McMurdo. Come in, over. U.S. number 31 calling McMurdo. Urgent. Come in, over.
Welcome to our super video covering The Thing. This will be no less than 3 hours and will cover all versions of The Thing before it became John Carpenter's Thing, how John became the director, how the actors were cast, the behind the scenes, the post-production, and the many theories that are in the movie. We like long-form analysis of films here, so if you want details, then this is the channel for you. Let's begin with our coverage of The Thing. In 1928, John Campbell began writing science fiction when he was 18 at MIT. For years, he established himself as a science fiction writer under two names. One was Don A. Stewart, and the other his own name. He focused less on his writing when he became the editor of Astounding Science Fiction. In his new position, he continued to make an impact for science fiction because he discovered and helped the careers of such prolific writers as Robert A. Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, and Theodore Sturgeon. Among his many stories, John Campbell's Who Goes There is often considered his most famous work, published in the August 1938 issue of Astounding Science Fiction. The story had 12 chapters. The novella begins in the Arctic with a large team in a room with the remains of a frozen alien thawing at the center. The second-in-command MacReady dumps a large block of exposition consisting of heady dialogue describing the environment, finding the alien craft, and the creature they found. Many of the characters in Carpenter's adaptation are in this story. There's Blair, a biologist, bald and eager to inspect the thing. Gary is in charge, logical and methodical. MacReady is a second-in-command, balanced and practically perfect. Norris, a physicist who is very cautious about doing anything with the frozen creature because he is having nightmares about it, specifically of it changing form and causing harm to the group. Copper is a doctor in this version. Clark and Bennings are there as well as 20 other humans. They assign a man to guard the thawing creature overnight, and when morning arrives, everyone is awakened and discover that the creature ran away after the guard fell asleep during his watch. Shortly after, the sound of angry dogs twist into howls in the distance. When they run to the dogs, they see the thing, and they burn and electrocute the creature. When finished, Blair states that the creature digests life forms and then imitates them when finished. It is then that Blair reveals that he destroyed all the vehicles to leave the facility, to keep the thing from leaving the continent. Blair then goes crazy, treating everyone like they are a thing. He also refuses to eat anything unless it is sealed in cans, and then the team come up with a blood test for humans. But it is corrupted, and Gary becomes one of the suspects who might have done it. Gary willingly gives up his position, so command falls to MacReady, and everyone questions who might be a thing. An interesting note about this novella is that it spends a lengthy amount of time explaining that simple cells can revive after freezing, but more complicated life forms like man do not, because multiple parts of the body are dependent on the whole working properly to function, and if one element is off, resuscitating is impossible. There are also debates in the book when people ask themselves if they are a thing and wondering what they would know if they were a copy. Even cows who are consumed by the thing continue making milk, and dogs that bit things begin transforming themselves as if they caught an infection. So everyone locks themselves up. There are a lot of psychological and logical debates on what to do. Before it ends, humans kill humans and things. But when they attack a thing that played dead, MacReady notices its body changes and therefore gets the idea that every cell of the thing runs for survival if in mortal danger. So he comes up with the idea of a blood test, very similar to Carpenter's film. The test works, and 2 humans are discovered to be things and are dealt with. After the men determine who is real and who is a copy, they go to test Blair, who is boarded up. When they find Blair, he is a creature complete with tentacles and multiple eyes. They try to shoot it, stab it, and burn it. The description of the thing is gruesome, using the words bubbling, sprouting, and licking like descriptive poetry. After dealing with Blair, they find that the creature was creating something with atomic energy from parts in their camp. The creature was a half-hour away from finishing this teleportation device. And then they focus on an albatross flying above, and they wonder if it's a thing, and then the story ends. Who Goes There was written when the alliance between the United States and Russia was falling apart and communists were seen as betrayers and enemies. In fact, President Truman decreed that anyone working on a federal level had to be screened for loyalty to the United States per his executive order number 9835. This was before McCarthyism started in 1950, but Americans did fear the danger within, and this is exactly what the book mirrored of its society at that time. This novella was very focused on paranoia and isolation, and yet for its time, it was extremely violent. It was also very popular, so much so that it became a hardcover book in 1948, and it was just a matter of time before people in Hollywood noticed it. In 1950, 2 screenplay writers, Charles Lederer and Ben Hecht, convinced producer Howard Hawks to buy the rights to Who Goes There. Campbell was open to the idea, and he sold it for $1,250. The First Thing film was vastly different from the book, obviously because back in the 1950s, a pulsating monster that digests you and turns into you violently was not a typical film-going experience. They also didn't have a ton of money. Originally, they planned for a blue-skinned, 3-eyed monster, but obviously they didn't have the money for that. So a lot of the book was changed, and although the film focused on an outpost that finds an alien in a block of ice and thaws it out, it's not like the novella at all. Instead of the alien consuming and copying other life forms, this thing was more like Frankenstein in appearance with Dracula's thirst for blood. The creature had more in common literally with vegetables, as it grew vegetable pods to reproduce thanks to the blood it collected. The result of all this is that the members of the outpost must keep together to defend against the creature. In the end, they douse the thing in fire, which was the first full-body fire stunt ever, and later they would electrocute the creature to kill it. The Thing from Another World is an enjoyable film, and it's on AFI's film list, and I recommend it to anyone who respects films for what they were when they came out, especially science fiction fans. It's perfect for those who love stuff like classic science fiction, such as Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, and Forbidden Planet. The Thing from Another World was released when McCarthyism was all the rage, and you would think the film would have used these themes from Who Goes There to champion the American anti-communism agenda. However, the film took a more generic approach to horror, and therefore it seemed very separate from the material it came from. The film released on April 27, 1951, and it made $1.9 million, which was really well for the time. The movie did better than the classic The Day the Earth Stood Still, which was also released the same year. Who Goes There remained in the zeitgeist and was rehashed by other media as well. In 1958, a radio drama called Exploring Tomorrow narrated Who Goes There under the title The Escape. It was actually hosted by John W. Campbell himself. Two people who were vital in the creation of the 1982 version were young at this time, and the first was, of course, John Carpenter. As a young teen, he loved movies while growing up in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and he made many of his own short horror films on his 8mm camera. Examples of his home movies were a claymation Godzilla and a sci-fi western with a one-eyed creature. He was a big fan of westerns and event films like Godzilla and the Forbidden Planet. But one of his favorites was, you guessed it, The Thing from Another World, which he would see after its initial release. Another person critical to making the 1982 The Thing was Stuart Cohen, who was also young at this time, and he not only loved the movie, but read Who Goes There when he was 12 years old. But no series lasted forever. For a short period, Who Goes There and The Thing from Another World became media of the past, as new films took over the market, but it would not remain dormant for long. John Carpenter entered college in Bowling Green, but would then transfer to USC School of Cinematic Arts, where he met and became buddies with Stuart Cohen. The two often talked about how much they loved The Thing from Another World, and little did they know that in the future they would work together to recreate Who Goes There. But while this was going on, Who Goes There returned. Well, sort of. This time it was copied in a good way, which is in itself ironic. During September 1972, a loose adaptation of Who Goes There was produced from Spanish-British studios. The film had Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and Telly Savalas, and it was called Horror Express. American audiences could see the film in November 1973. Technically, the film was not based off Who Goes There, but there are a ton of similarities that just cannot be missed. In the film, an anthropologist, played by Christopher Lee, is on a train heading home after finding frozen remains of something he discovered in Manchuria. The creature thaws out and begins copying and killing people on the train by absorbing their memories and skills. Eventually, it is discovered that the creature is extraterrestrial, and it can communicate and wants to build a new spaceship to escape the planet which it has been stranded on for millions of years. The Thing in this movie can also resurrect those it kills like zombies in an effort to protect itself. However, none of this helps the creature survive, and in the end, it is disposed of in a fiery train crash. If you're into horror films, it's an entertaining film. While Horror Express was being made and released, John Carpenter was embroiled with the production of his student film that grew out of hand with Dan O'Bannon called Dark Star. O'Bannon and Carpenter met at USC, and just to show how enthusiastic Carpenter was about The Thing, the first conversation he had with O'Bannon was about how much they loved Howard Hawks' The Thing from Another World. They started making Dark Star in 1970, and finally on March 30th, 1974, it would be released and subsequently expanded to other theaters through time. Dark Star was considered very creative for a student film, but this is what O'Bannon had to say about it.
And instead of the most impressive student film ever made, we had the least impressive professional film ever made.
Dark Star allowed Carpenter to make Assault on Precinct 13 in 1976, and after that he was tapped to make Halloween, which everyone would soon know. But before that, in 1976, John Carpenter's old friend Stuart Cohen, who was currently producing television projects, decided to pitch the idea for Who Goes There to the Terman Foster Company, owned by David Foster and Lawrence Terman. The company Stuart Cohen pitched to, the Truman Foster Company, produced such things as The Drowning Pool, First Love, and Heroes. Before they teamed up, Terman was most noted for producing The Graduate and The Great White Hope, while David Foster was involved with producing The Getaway. Both producers liked the idea of making Who Goes There, so Cohen, Turman, and Foster went to Universal Studios together to pitch the idea. During that pitch, Stuart Cohen's angle when presenting his idea was the key direction for the future picture. The Thing is a film about paranoia, the monster in all men, which is the phrase I used when I sold the film to Universal in 1977. Cohen's vision was not to remake The Thing from another world, but to adapt Who Goes There and focus on the paranoid themes that made that work so frightening and disturbing. Universal was on board and they decided to make Stuart Cohen the co-producer, while David Foster and Lawrence Turman would take the mantle as main producers. The annoying thing about all this is that if you look up Wikipedia, as of the date of this video, only Lawrence Turman and David Foster are credited as those who got the ball rolling for this project, which is simply not the case. The first hurdle was that the studio had to get the rights to both Who Goes There and The Thing from Another World. The current holders of the novella rights were Hal Barwood and Matthew Robbins. The writing team was involved in such films as Sugarland Express, Corvette Summer, and later Dragon Slayer, Legend of Billie Jean, and Batteries Not Included. They were close friends to Steven Spielberg and would help him in polishing the scripts on Jaws and paramountly Close Encounters of the Third Kind, even though they were not given full credit for their inclusion with those projects. You can explore those details in both our series covering those films. Because these two men were so experienced and had worked with Universal in the past, the studio did not hesitate to offer them the job as writers, but they passed as they were just too busy. So Universal offered to buy the rights from the writers, and they agreed. The rights to The Thing from Another World belonged to Wilbur Stark, who was a television and radio producer. When the studio bought the rights, there was a condition that he would appear as an executive producer in name only on all print advertisements, posters, TV spots, and press material. With that, the studio greenlit The Thing in 1977. At first, Universal turned to Tobe Hooper and his writing partner, Kim Henkel. Hooper made the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974. The movie was monumental, costing $140,000 and eventually making $30 million. Hooper had a contract with Universal and was a perfect choice to make this film because the very genesis of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was Tobe Hooper's genuine belief that people were the true monsters, and that was the key element of his movie. This matched Stuart Cohen's pitch to the letter. During this period, despite this sounding perfect, Hooper and his writer Kim Henkel discussed making the movie with a man hunting the thing obsessively, like Captain Ahab hunting Moby Dick. Of course, this is not what the three producers wanted to hear, and they decided to pass on Hooper's ideas, so he was never hired for the project. They tried to bring in writer Bill Lancaster, who was hot off writing The Bad News Bears, but Lancaster stated he had the impression that they wanted to remake The Thing from Another World, and he was not interested in doing that. Now, in truth, Cohen always wanted John Carpenter to direct, as they were not only friends, but they both had a passion for the project because they talked about it back in their college days. It was always my goal to have John make this movie. In 1980, with events reaching critical mass, I finally got my wish. Carpenter was discussed, but the studio did not like the idea at the time. Up until then, Carpenter was a small fry director in the eyes of the studio, and he was simply just an independent filmmaker, not a big budget one. He had only done Dark Star and Assault on Precinct 13 up to that point, so the producers moved on as they had to please the studio. Meanwhile, they would find a writer in legendary author William F. Nolan, who wrote the original Logan's Run and subsequent sequels. Nolan had also recently wrote a screenplay for Burnt Offerings. While Nolan got to work on the treatment, the director search would continue. John Landis was considered, but his biggest film to date were Schlock and the Kentucky Fried Movie. Landis's approach in films seemed more comedic, and in the end, He just wasn't considered right for this project. Finally, Nolan brought his treatment to the team on April 1978, and it went something like this. Everything begins at an Antarctica outpost that consists of 9 men and 3 women. We follow a weather balloon launched as it views the base and the surrounding areas as it heads out over to a camp where 3 of the outpost's men are working on getting samples. Something flies overhead and crashes. Thinking it's a meteor, they get into their snowcat to check it out. While heading there, they radio the coordinates they're going to check out. When they get there, they discover an alien scout ship of some kind big enough for a crew of 3, and they notice an opening in the side of the craft. At first, they are trepidatious, but then they soon give in to curiosity and enter the craft. After they enter, the opening seals itself behind them. We then cut back to the outpost where the trio of explorers, who found the ship, return. They are met by McCready, leader of the camp. He asks if they found anything, and the group says they found nothing. Next to McCready is a pack dog named Macho, who stares suspiciously at the 3 men who lie about finding the spaceship. That night, the wife of one of the men who found the ship is plagued by bad dreams. In those dreams, she imagines her husband is trying to kill her, and when she goes to the chief doctor, Blair, it is dismissed as nothing to worry about. However, the next night, she lies in bed with her husband, sleeping soundly while he stares at her unblinking. The next morning, the cook Norris notices that their dog, Macho, is missing, while a team goes out on a snowcat to find a downed weather balloon. They find the balloon, and they also find the outpost's favorite dog, Macho, dead. When autopsied, Blair says he can't explain how the dog died. Blair also treats the wife, who is plagued by nightmares, by giving her a sedative. The wife explains that there is weird seismic activity underneath the base, and she needs to look at it closer. But for now, she's going to bed. That night, while the wife is suffering from more nightmares, the door to the bedroom opens. The husband next to her notices the other 2 men that found the ship with him. After the door shuts, he grabs his wife firmly, while his eyes, mouth, and hands turn into slimy tendrils and enter into every pore of the woman's body as she struggles hopelessly. Then the man that was her husband seemingly drains and dies. The next morning, she tells Blair that her dreams are gone and she feels better. When asked about the seismic activity she mentioned before, she brushes it off like it's nothing. Then someone reports a snowcat is missing and her husband is gone. She states he left during the night and didn't want to wake anyone as he needed to collect some more samples. But McCready is not satisfied. He orders a copter to find the tractor that can't be communicated with because, for some reason, the radio is down at the facility. In the copter is a pilot and one of the 3 that found the alien ship in the beginning. The copter goes up and eventually lands by the alien craft. The pilot exits the craft, now a copy. The dead, deflated body of his co-pilot is put in the alien spaceship, and then the spaceship is destroyed by a laser of some type before the copter pilot returns to the chopper. When the chopper arrives at base, McCready asks, "Where's the co-pilot?" And the pilot responds that he dropped him off at McMurdo Base for a medical emergency. Appendix attack for sure. I knew Blair couldn't handle it. Since there is no radio, the team can't verify his claim. That night, the 3 doppelgangers are digging tunnels deep under the base with the laser tools we saw the alien ship destroyed with. The cook Norris stumbles into the area of the base where there are loose floorboards and discovers the entrance to this cave system. Curiously, he goes down where he discovers the 3 aliens digging. He asks what they're doing, and they advance on him. Panic occurs, and Norris hacks at one of the approaching things with a knife. But after contact, there is no blood. Instead, there is light and tendrils. Norris turns to run, but before he gets away, tendrils grab him, and the body the alien inhabited before Norris drops like an empty sack behind him as Norris turns into a copy. The next morning, McCready's wife, Liz, tells him that another snowcat is missing and a note was left for him. It reads, "Can't take the thought of being holed up here all winter, so I'm going to join the others at McMurdo. Sorry." With 3 of the 12 original crew of the base gone, MacReady jumps into action. He realizes the 3 that are currently missing are the original 3 who found nothing at the start of our story, so he goes to check out the coordinates they reported where they found nothing. After going there, MacReady returns with a piece of black metal that remained from the crashed alien craft. Blair cannot analyze it. MacReady does a meeting and informs everyone that the group of 3 lied about finding something out there, and now they're all gone. The radio is dead, and afterwards, a worried crew member approaches a mechanic. The mechanic pretends to comfort the person, but then tries to grab them as it turns into a thing. It is then that the body of the mechanic is crushed, but no blood emanates from the corpse. Instead, alien tendrils escape the body and consume the person trying to defend themselves, leaving only 5 people left that are human at the base. Shortly after, the power to the station begins to go in and out for some reason. The problem cannot be identified. That night, as the temperature is lowered, MacReady's wife goes into a hydroponics room where Blair is standing. She asks him if he's okay, and he states he broke one of her plants. She looks, and there is a plant on the ground. Then Blair leaves. She stands there for a moment, a little rattled, until she shockingly discovers a sucked dry corpse of one of the vessels for the doppelganger aliens, stuffed in a locker. The next scene has Blair, MacReady, and his wife examining the human shell, and Blair states he can't explain it. They then part. MacReady states to his wife that he thinks all the missing people suffered the same fate as the body she found, and Blair can't be trusted. He links everything to whatever the team denied finding: the seismic disturbances under the facility, the radio out, and the power drain. MacReady and his wife go back to the greenhouse, where Blair was found, to look for clues. They pass 2 tech guys who report they still can't figure out what's going on with the generator and radio. MacReady keeps his wife close and tells them to keep working on it. When they walk away, one tech turns into the thing and consumes the other, leaving only MacReady and his wife as the only humans at the base. The couple find the loose floorboards in the greenhouse and discover the dug alien tunnels leading below. They go into them and make sure to return the floorboards to normal to disguise their movements. Meanwhile, the 3 remaining aliens meet up. They drop the body of the last human and calmly, slowly, march their way to the greenhouse. Below, MacReady and his wife discover an alien spaceship, which is described as gigantic, as huge as an Empire State Building, laying on its side. MacReady muses that this ship must have been buried in the ice for some time, and whatever is taking over their people were after it, and they were using the generator to help bring power back to the ship. The 3 aliens then appear, led by Blair, and they enter the ship while MacReady and his wife stealthily slip aboard. They witness the aliens shedding their skins and prepping for ship takeoff. They enter an atmosphere bubble, and MacReady tries to fire at one of the aliens with his pistol. The aliens speak to him by using a form of translation device stating that they want to leave peacefully and only harmed out of necessity to disguise themselves. If they don't leave now, MacReady and his wife will die. But MacReady's wife, Liz, grabs an alien laser pistol, and she fires at them. And the shot is perfect, as it causes the atmosphere that the aliens are in to turn toxic, and they immediately die as the ship goes into a self-destruct mode. MacReady and his wife race up the tunnels, get into a garage, start up a helicopter, and fly away before the craft explodes beneath, destroying the ice shelf and everything else. Then they're shown flying away to safety. This version did have a lot of tense moments, but was more like Horror Express, Body Snatchers, or The Puppet Masters, in that the thing jumps from body to body, and in the end, Nolan's ideas were passed on. They tried another novelist named David Wiltz, but he didn't work out either. After being in pre-production for some time, Universal was losing faith in the project, but the 3 core producers toiled away. However, with no director and another failed writer, for the moment, the project seemed to be in limbo. For over half a year, the Universal-backed The Thing seemed to be languishing in development hell, with failed writers and no director to helm the project. One of those directors passed over in 1977 was John Carpenter, but now, in late 1978, he was becoming a phenomenon. When his Halloween movie became a huge event, it was no less than a cultural milestone. But Universal still hesitated on the project, even though they were more amenable to hiring Carpenter. The problem was, horror and science fiction were not seen as in demand in the 70s, and the studio was not eager to pull the trigger. But then Alien came out, and Universal was not only stunned by the film's success, but was eager to follow that film's approach to science fiction. So finally, they gave in to Stuart Cohen's original vision to hire Carpenter for the film. It was Cohen who approached Carpenter again. As mentioned previously, Carpenter was a huge fan of The Thing from Another World and Who Goes There, and this was advertised to all, because on Halloween, The Thing from Another World was predominantly front and center on the television when the kids were watching TV as Michael Myers was up to no good. Despite his love for the movie, when Carpenter was approached for The Thing, he was not enthusiastic. I really didn't want to get near it. Carpenter was currently interested in making a Howard Hawks-type western called El Diablo, as well as working on The Fog. Every script they showed Carpenter for The Thing was just awful in Carpenter's words, and when they encouraged Carpenter to write his own project, this really made him wary of the project, because he recently struggled to write a screenplay for the Philadelphia Experiment, and he didn't want to repeat that experience. But his old USC school buddy, producer Stuart Cohen, kept encouraging him to join the project. Carpenter was blunt to his friend. "You guys have failed 3 times. Why do I want to sign on to a failed project?" But his friendship to Cohen caused John to reluctantly agree to help develop a script and look at the source material for ideas. That was when he reread Who Goes There. I reread the novella and I thought, this is a pretty good story here. We get the right writer, the right situation, we could do something. One of the things in the novella that really inspired Carpenter to work on the project was when MacReady used a hot metal to test blood. The blood test scene is the reason I did the movie. I thought I could do something special with it. To keep things moving, the producers approached other writers, like the great Richard Matheson, who penned I Am Legend and Stir of Echoes. Nigel Neal was approached, and he would later work on Halloween 3 as an uncredited writer, and Derek Washburn, who wrote Silent Running and The Deer Hunter, but none of them worked out. The producers then returned to writer Bill Lancaster in August 1979. Lancaster was the son of Burt Lancaster. Like Carpenter, he turned down the project in 1977. Lancaster was on a winning streak after writing The Bad News Bears and The Bad News Bears Go to Japan. Since turning down the project, he reread Who Goes There, and now word was going around town that Carpenter was being courted for the project. After hearing all that, he was more amenable to the project. He was asked to give some ideas, and Lancaster met with Carpenter in August 1979. Lancaster stated he wanted to adhere strictly to the novella, and Carpenter agreed. He also wanted to set the movie in the Antarctic, where there was no rescue possible, rather than Alaska, where rescue was feasible. So while Lancaster went off to write, Carpenter returned to finish The Fog. The production of The Fog is significant to The Thing because 2 key people who worked on that movie would go on to work for The Thing. The first was Dean Cundey, who was the director of photography. Cundey had worked with Carpenter on Halloween and would go on to work with him in Escape from New York. The second key person was Rob Bottin. Bottin did some special effects on the film and played the ghostly Blake. He was hired thanks to introductions from his buddy Dean Cundey. Bottin would return to work for Carpenter again on The Thing, but first he had to go off to work on a little film called The Howling. Often, Carpenter would meet to talk about the direction of Lancaster's script, and for a short time the writer struggled with dialogue and the confined elements of the story. When Lancaster finished the first 40 pages, a lot of changes happened from the novella. Instead of 37 characters, there were 12. The film would start with the Norwegian helicopter chase as well. Lancaster had a lot of time to write his script, almost over a year, and during August through November 1980, John would go off to film Escape from New York, which we covered on this channel as well, so check that out. Gotta plug my work, folks. Anyways, during filming, John would often talk with Kurt Russell about the film, and Russell would give casting choice insights, and they would talk story ideas. Finally, during the fall of 1980, Bill Lancaster finished the first draft of his script. After Stuart Cohen read it, he got with John, and this is what was said. "This is the best script I've ever read. Are you in?" I asked. A pause. And then, oh yeah. At this point, Carpenter was pretty much the director for The Thing, and it was going to be his film. And in 1981, things would move fast in development for The Thing. After John Carpenter took over The Thing, Lawrence Turman and David Foster brought in their illustrator Dale Kuipers, who they worked with on Caveman, to help him visualize the creature for the film. Dale flew in from Wisconsin, and he drew up some sketches for Carpenter in his office, and John hired him. Dale's creature was a shapeshifter, but was different than Botine's version. It would jump on your head like a face hugger, and would then scan its victim's alpha waves, and it would duplicate the victim perfectly by doing so. The creature also had the ability to produce hallucinogens in its environment that would cause others to see hideous forms around them. After working on a few concepts and building a sculpt of the creature, which you can see here, Dale was put on leave from the project as he got into an accident in Green Bay which required him to have a few months to recover. But the filmmakers had to move forward, so they hired another to build his designs. At the time, Rob Bottin had just finished on The Howling, and Carpenter spoke with him about the project. He wanted Bottin to construct Dale's designs. Bottin wasn't sold on the designs, though, citing that it was too much alien, and The Thing needed to be unique. In short, he wanted to design the creature himself, and therefore suggested that the thing could be anything, any shape, and had no regard for the human form, and therefore would be amalgamations of things it absorbed in the past. Carpenter was interested and told Bottin to do some concept work with the help of illustrator Mike Plug, who was also working on storyboards for the film. Joining them was writer Bill Lancaster, who would have to change the script based on Bottin's designs because he was proposing something completely different for the creature. Early designs of the creature varied, as you can see, and it took time for the creature to find its true form, if you will. Finally, Dale returned after proper healing to discover that Bottin had designed an entirely new creature. Dale was offered a job as designer and sculptor, but he decided to leave the project as he felt the concept was too far removed from his. Things moved forward with storyboards and designs, and on March 1981, the second draft of the script was complete. With many storyboards and production design elements realized, they needed to figure out where they were going to make their Antarctican base. And originally, Carpenter wanted to film the base at the same site where Howard Hawks filmed the saucer being discovered in A Thing from Another World. A team actually went to Montana to check the location, but the truth was that area had received minimal snow for the last 2 years. So they decided to send Stuart Cohen and a team to scout Alaska and British Columbia. They found a site at an edge of a glacier that was picturesque and had a fairly flat surface for constructing a camp near Hyder, Alaska, on the border of Canada. As things moved forward with Bottin's designs, Carpenter sat back somewhat, as he was noted to say that Rob was a little in over his head. However, Carpenter took a leap of faith in the young man, as his ideas were unique. Carpenter then moved on to casting the film. Richard Masur and John Carpenter knew each other after meeting through Tom Mackey. Over time, they attended get-togethers, and when they would bump into each other, they were chummy. Masur loved Who Goes There and The Thing from Another World. He had heard that The Thing was in the works, and at first he was disgusted because he thought remaking The Thing from Another World was ridiculous. Then he heard it was an adaptation of Who Goes There, and Masur asked John to read the script. When he saw John again, he showed interest, and that's when John said, "Who do you think you want to play?" Masur asked, "Who is the guy that runs the place?" Carpenter quickly replied, "Not you." So instead of landing the role of Gary, Masur stated he really liked the dog handler, and Carpenter asked, "Why?" "I love this character. I just think he's so misanthropic. He doesn't seem to want to be with anybody but the dogs." John stated the part was his if he wanted it, and Masur accepted. The casting director for The Thing, Anita Dan, put forth a casting call for the film. For Blair, originally Donald Pleasance was eyed by Carpenter, but at that point he was a bit famous, and they needed someone that was less noticeable, for reasons we will go into when we cover the film. Wilford Brimley was then tapped for the role. Rob Bottin asked if he could play the part of stoner and conspiracy theorist Palmer, but Stuart Cohen stated no. I put a stop to that because he was way behind schedule, and as I told him, we're after actors for this who can bring a lot with them to the roles. You don't have time, and you're not doing it. David Clennon was asked to come in and try for the part of Bennings, but when he read the script, he thought Palmer was more fun. Peter Maloney was trying out for the part at the same time Clennon was, and one of the big audition spots for the film was in New York at the Coca-Cola building. According to Maloney, they were asked to improvise scenes where they were attacked by a creature, trying to defend themselves by flipping tables and showing fear. At the end of the audition, he was asked how he would feel if he filmed a movie in the coldest place on Earth, and he replied that it was fine. He loved every aspect of making movies. That was when producer David Foster leaned forward and asked him, "Well, what do you love about it, making movies?" Peter Maloney's reply was simple: the coffee. There's always a hot, large urn of coffee around your workplace, and I love that. When they decided to cast Peter Maloney as Bennings, Carpenter decided that David Clennon could try out for Palmer. Universal was screening comedians like Gary Shandling, Jay Leno, and Charles Fleischer for the part, but Carpenter opted for David Clennon instead, as he wanted someone more serious for the role. For Knowles, Franklin A.J. came in for a reading, and the comedian then began lecturing the interviewees, stating that Knowles was a black stereotype. Obviously, he didn't get the part. Instead, the part went to one of my 70s and 80s favorites, T.K. Carter, as I always looked for him since he was on one of my favorite TV shows, Good Times, as one of JJ's friends.
The roller derby, where the thrills are exceeded only by the vicious brutality of its demented participants.
And I positively loved his role in 1980's Seems Like Old Times as Chester.
Where'd you get that hat?
From a chauffeur.
You stole it.
No, I found it.
Where?
On a chauffeur.
Oh, TK, you should have been in more stuff. Keith David tried out for the part of Childs, but lost to Roger Mosley, who was officially cast for that character. Other candidates for Childs were Jeffrey Holder, Isaac Hayes, Carl Weathers, and Bernie Casey. Ernie Hudson was also a big contender for the role. In a surprise twist, Mosley was offered a part in Magnum P.I., and so he decided to take that gig instead. So he passed on The Thing. Keith then got the part because he was the runner-up. The two big choices for Copper were Brian Dennehy and William Daniels, but at the last minute, Carpenter chose Richard Dysart. Joel Polis was cast for Fuchs, mainly because Carpenter remembered Polis for being in a student film while he was at USC and felt he fit that part. He had seen The Thing when he was 8 and was terrified by the movie. When the interview finally came, he sat down with John and heard he went to USC and asked if he did a lot of play work. John was blunt and said he didn't, and Polis was shocked because play directing was big to him and the school. He asked, "Well, how the F are you supposed to direct me then?" Producer David Foster looked at Joel like he just lost the job, but John Carpenter smiled and hired him just because of that moment. When he got cast, he took a college biology course to get more familiar with the character's career. This would be Joel's first feature film he was cast on. For Gary, they originally considered Powers Booth, Lee Van Cleef, Jerry Orbach, Kevin Conway, and Richard Mulligan, but in the end, it fell to Donald Moffat. While they were doing casting in New York, Kurt Russell and Carpenter went to a play called American Buffalo that had Al Pacino, Clifton James, and Thomas G. Waits. Carpenter was impressed by Waits, and he was contacted to audition for the character of Sanchez, who was the radio operator. Currently, the person in the number one spot for the role of Sanchez was none other than Brad Dourif. Tom hated the name of the character and was not enthusiastic. He didn't like horror, and he barely read the script. He said when he went to the audition, he went in ice cold. He didn't put much effort into getting the part, but he did want to leave his play because he was doing 8 shows a week for a year and just wanted a change. After he got the part, the character's name was turned into John Simmons, another boring name Waits did not like. Now, Kurt Russell helped John with who to cast for MacReady, and Kurt was fairly familiar with the project. Candidates for MacReady were vast, ranging from Christopher Walken, Nick Nolte, Jeff Bridges, Ed Harris, John Hurd, Chris Christopherson, Tom Berenger, Scott Glenn, Fred Ward, Peter Coyote, and Tim McIntyre. Sam Shepard was interested, but was not pursued. Jack Thompson and Tom Atkins were strong contenders, but as we know, none of them got the part. One of the reasons Tom Atkins was not cast for MacReady, along with a few other familiar faces in Carpenter's library, was that Stuart Cohen suggested that Carpenter go outside his comfort zone of actors and cast people he never worked with before to make the film completely different than anything he made in the past. So originally, Kurt was not a target to go after for the lead in the film. Finally, it was down to the wire to cast MacReady, and Carpenter began leaning towards casting his pal Russell for the film, and the studio loved the idea. Russell grew a thick beard for the film, and then Carpenter added to the image by giving Russell a big hat to wear to finish the look. Russell loathed the hat, but wore it as instructed, and I'm sorry, Kurt, I frickin' love the look. Iconic, man. Simply iconic. Russell was the last character to be cast on the same day. A large amount of the crew went to Alaska during June to build the location set so that it would be finished and ready for when the snows would fall and settle on the buildings. Russell would be paid $400,000 to do the film, while all other actors were paid $50,000 each. The cast was given 2 weeks to rehearse the film in an empty soundstage at Universal, with tables, chairs, and a single blackboard. This was a strange thing in a studio film, and it was suggested that the producers allowed this to assuage people from thinking the actors casted wouldn't just be there to play second fiddle to a monster. We had difficulty securing the people we wanted to initially meet, and it was only when I got them to read the script that they began to understand what we were up to and how well the characters were developed. It's a process John never repeated. I'm not sure he loved it at the time. I think he felt that it gave the actors too much power, but he did it, and here it made sense. When Tom Waits and Keith David saw each other, Waits was stunned and said, "What the F are you doing here?" Tom and Keith were old buddies from Juilliard and used to smoke pot in the stairwells together. I wonder if they did this during the production of The Thing. Methinks yes. This was Keith David's first film, as he had graduated from Juilliard a year ago, and his contract was for 20 weeks of filming, and he was very excited. Yet just before filming, he was in a car accident that was caused by his inexperience driving. No one was harmed except Keith, who broke 2 bones in his hand, and he was nervous that it would cost him the job, so he tried to hide it. When on set, John Carpenter and Larry Franco were walking towards Keith. Before introductions occurred, both of them suddenly noticed that Keith's hand was swollen up like a boxing glove, and they immediately reacted. So when you watch the film, you can notice that Keith's left hand is often hidden, and when you do see it, It's usually in a glove, like you see here. During this period, the cast got to know each other quite well and got comfortable. It was during this time that John Carpenter screened The Thing from Another World for the cast, and he was also at these rehearsals. If something worked, Carpenter would tweak things in the script with Bill Lancaster, who was there as well. Carpenter also took the time during this period to call each actor to him, and they discussed their characters in great depth one-on-one. This care and focus by both directors and actors manifested itself into the film. For instance, Thomas Waits, who was currently a character named Simmons, hated that name, and one day while he was out jogging, he had sunglasses on, and Waits assumed that his character wanted to be a movie star and hated the world he got himself into in the Arctic. But to give the character more identity, Waits put on sunglasses during a rehearsal and asked Carpenter if the character's name can be changed to Windows. John took a drag on his cigarette, looked up, down, then gazed at everyone, and finally said, "Okay, from now on, everybody, Tommy wants us to call him Windows. Let's move on." However, when Carpenter left, two actors specifically hated the fact that Waits' character was now called Windows. They're like, "This is effing bull, man. This is so arbitrary. What are you doing? Letting him call himself Windows and wear sunglasses inside." John, I don't think he gave a F what they said. I think they only said it to me. I think they ridiculed me because they thought I was just doing it to get attention, but I really wasn't. Donald Moffat didn't want Tommy Waits to wear those sunglasses through the whole movie, and he didn't want to have to call him Windows. Not all of the actors' extensive work and suggestions would stay in the film. One such cut was the relationship between Childs and Clark. Both actors spent a lot of time together, deciding that they were the two physically largest men on the set, and as a result, they would be diametrically opposed to each other. None of this was from the script. It was simply actors taking it upon themselves to enhance characters in the script, and you will see some of this in the film, and we will cover that when we get there. The main photography for the film began in Universal Studios, California in the summer of 1981. All sets were usually 40 to 45 degrees, and when you went outside, it was around 100 degrees. Since there are many stories to cover about filming, we will start with stories about Wilford Brimley, as these events mainly occurred during the early shoot. At the beginning of the shoot, Brimley was auditioning for the film Tender Mercies as a favor to his buddy Robert Duvall. Brimley was around the cast mumbling that he had to meet that sumbitch director Bruce Beresford, and when the director came to the set to meet Brimley, they took a moment to discuss the film. This is the discussion that occurred, which was overheard by Tom Waits, who was waiting by the only phone on the set for a call.
And he goes into the audition and the director says, "I'd like to hear you read for the part." And Will goes, "I don't do that." And he goes, "Well, I'm not so sure you can play the part." And Will goes, "I'm not so sure you can direct the goddamn movie." And he gets up and walks out.
After this event, Duvall kept calling, asking Tom to get Brimley for him. Eventually, Wilford would do the film. On the set, everyone kept talking about meta things involving the Thing. Actors wondered if they knew they were the Thing when they became the Thing. They wondered if others would become the Thing, and it was non-stop. One person with little interest in this conversation was Richard Masur, who from day one knew he was human up until his death, because it was in the script. The only other person that didn't take part in this conversation was Wilford Brimley. One time when the actors were all sitting around in director chairs talking about this very subject, Wilford just sat there shaking his head. Someone finally asked him what was the matter, and he said, "Are you paying attention to what's going on here? Do you watch them playing grab-ass out there all the time? You think this movie's about us. It's not about us. It's about the rubber guy. Stop thinking about all this stuff." The actors working on the thing were constantly trying to improvise their characters to add more depth to them. For them, defining their motivations and world outlook was a big deal, with the exception to Wilford Brimley, who thought they were all overdoing it. Joel Polis was so excited about his role that he took a biology course, and when he told this to Brimley, he looked at him and said, "What'd you do that for?" Actors like Thomas Waits would constantly pester Carpenter on his motivation, and Carpenter would ask him if he needs motivation for everything. To which Waits responded, "Well, yeah, I'm an actor. I have to know why I'm doing it." Carpenter stressed that he was the director. He shot what's on screen, and therefore the actors worried about that stuff. But the actors kept continuing this approach until one day Carpenter came around the actors, who were all huddled talking about their characters. And this is what he said. "What are you guys talking about? Your motivation? I'll tell you what your motivation is. It's your paycheck. Now leave me alone." Despite the close and friendly nature on the set, there was still tension for one reason or another sometimes. For Joel Polis and Keith David's first or second day of shooting, there was a critical death scene that would unfold. Childs, Windows, and Palmer were supposed to walk down a corridor, and they would enter a room where they discovered Fuchs dead with a shovel in his chest. It was well rehearsed by the three actors for about 2 weeks now. When the red light came on for filming, they discussed amongst themselves why they were doing this scene, because it was going to get cut, as it made no sense why the thing would kill someone with a shovel rather than absorb and copy the person. That's when Keith David recalled,
I've done 2 pictures with John, and I've never, ever heard him raise his voice, really. Until that day, when he came around the corner, we're shooting this fucking scene because I want Mr. Parson. And the 3 of us were sitting there shitting in our pants as well. Oh, whatever, we wouldn't have been
The death scene never made it to the final cut, as later John agreed with the assessment that the thing wouldn't kill a person this way. Thomas G. Waits recalled he also had a scene with David Clennon that was like a page and a half in length. They were practicing on set, and John entered, telling them they had to cut that scene and they didn't need to practice it. After John left the room, Waits was pissed because it was a big scene, and the 2 actors began complaining vehemently between themselves with lots of cuss words. What they didn't know was that Dean Cundy and John Carpenter were in the other room talking about a scene, and John kept pausing his chat with Cundy to listen into his headphones. John was sitting with me, and we were talking about the next shot or something, and he was listening on his headphones, and he stopped and he listened, and then he turned to me and said, "Excuse me, just a minute." And he calmly walked down the hall and around the corner, and there was silence. And then he walked back and he said, "I think I took care of that. Now what were we saying?" What Dean didn't know was that John returned to the room where his 2 actors were complaining and told them that they were on hot mics and that he heard everything they said. He then left without another word, and Waits felt very bad about it because he was grateful for the part. He was pretty harsh with his words, too. Before the shoot was over, he would write John Carpenter a letter to apologize. When it came time to film the scene where Palmer said his iconic line,
"You gotta be fucking kidding."
it was originally intended to simply be an over-the-shoulder shot of him saying the line while seeing the creature skitter. When cut was called and folks were preparing to leave the set, Richard Masser went to John and insisted that he do coverage for Palmer because he saw that it was the funniest moment in the movie. And they needed to focus on Palmer when he said the line. Carpenter said they didn't need to shoot that, and then showed him it wasn't in the storyboard. Masser stated he didn't give an F about the storyboard, and that John had to do coverage for the scene. I said, you have to shoot David saying the line. If you don't shoot David saying the line, you will regret this for the rest of your life. John tried to move on, but Masser was insistent and pestered John so much about the shot that Carpenter finally caved in and said, F it, shoot it. This shot, of course, would become iconic, and it shows how a director who listens to their crew can evolve their films into more than conceptually intended. Now, when Doc lost his arms, they used a real-life amputee who lost his arms during an industrial accident, and he was actually given a Doc mask to wear. In the film, a lot of people don't notice the mask because they're focused on the gore of his arms. When filming the scene, some of the actors and crew were appalled, thinking the man would be reliving his accident while filming the scene. Some of the actors would go up to the man in an overly caring manner, asking if he was cool and if everything was okay. And this was how Joe Carone, the amputee, replied. "This is great. This is so great. I can't wait to do this." The effects Rob Bottin and his team made was just amazing, and it still holds up today 40 plus years later, and mostly slept on site, insistent on getting things right, which you do see on screen. Bottin was a perfectionist, and when filming scenes, Rob tried to make everything as dark as he could. It was not uncommon to see Dean Cundey arguing with his buddy Rob about the lighting, and John Carpenter was between them trying to mediate. Finally, Cundey was noted to say, "I got to light the goddamn scene." As time went on, Universal grew very concerned over rumors of labor strikes that were on the horizon in mid-October 1981, so the studio wanted to avoid their productions being affected by it. So they asked the cast and crew if they could rush the production to finish all stage work with principals before that date. The team did what they were told, and as the projected strike date approached, the crew achieved their goal and finished filming at Universal. At this point, they roughly had 80 to 85% of the film in the can, and the cast and crew would get some time off for a short bit while they waited for the snows to fall thoroughly at the location set on the border of Alaska and British Columbia. This would fundamentally help the film in the end, because now John Carpenter looked at what he filmed so far. During mid-October 1981, John had about 6 weeks to explore a unique opportunity to really look at what he had. So he made a rough cut. When he was finished, he showed up at Stuart Cohen's office and stated that the movie didn't work. It dragged on forever, was dull, and lacking tension. Stuart Cohen recalled John saying, "The movie came to life for the first time during the kennel, then lapsed into passivity until the next effects scene, which was then the Norris transformation." And for a film that was trying to lay down its marker as a state-of-the-art monster movie that, I remember John saying, was a long time between monsters. There was a ton of stuff deleted from this movie, and a lot of that footage hasn't been released yet for whatever reason. But the key thing to understand at this point is that the movie John made into a rough cut was nothing like the movie we got. Now, to give you an idea of how much was cut and how much this film was altered from the start to the final product, we are going to look at a script which the actors read to try out for the parts. This was not the shooting script. We want to look at the evolution from draft 2 to this moment, and this script also gives more details to the environment and characters, which would later be cut from the film. The script begins with the Norwegian helicopter. Norris and Bennings are outside setting up a weather balloon while Childs is doing mechanic work. The dog comes rushing towards the camp while the men pour out of the facility to see what the ruckus is all about. The copter goes so low it bounces, and its blades literally snap off as the chopper flips over with its belly to the sky. A Norwegian survives the crash and comes out shooting, hitting Bennings and then the dog in the hip. Norris heroically drags Bennings out of the danger zone as Gary shoots the Norwegian dead. We then cut to Gary inspecting the Norwegian dog tag, and the group muse over what the heck the Norwegian was rambling about before he died. Meanwhile, Doc stitches up Bennings while Clark says he will be there for a while as he works on the dog's bullet wound. Sanchez, which we will now call Windows to avoid confusion, tells Blair he can't get anyone while Doc announces that he wants to go up in the chopper and check out the Norwegian camp. Everyone laughs, stating that MacReady won't go anywhere till the spring and he's probably drunk. We then meet MacReady in his shack playing chess while hanging out with his blow-up doll. When he starts losing, Norris bangs on his shack door and MacReady angrily short-circuits the machine, like the film, because he lost. He gets to the door and Norris says, "You jerking off or just pissed?" MacReady then asks if there's another chess machine at the base. MacReady is more combative about taking up the helicopter in this script. He states it's against regulations, and when Copper says they will get Palmer to take them, he retorts, "What are you talking about? He had 2 months training in those choppers." They then fly to the Norwegian camp, where they find the man who killed himself with a razor. While walking, MacReady finds a centerfold and pockets it for further viewing. Then they discover a severed arm gripping a welding torch that was seemingly cut in half by a door. They then find the block of ice and a closet with a body hanging in it and a picture of the Norwegians smiling together. Back at the base, Knowles is cooking and is lectured by Gary to turn his radio down, while Windows fails to contact anyone outside the base. We then cut to the dog walking and entering a room while the occupant turns. In this version, there is sounds of struggle, and the door closes. We then have a short montage where Clark is feeding the dogs, and Fuchs jogs past him waving. Then Childs enters his room and talks to his beloved pot plants. He sees the dog by his door, and it has no bandage since it just assimilated someone. But he promptly shoos the dog off, worrying that it might urinate on his marijuana. Blair walks in the hall, sees a mangled bandage on the floor, picks it up, and then continues to his lab. Palmer is shown working on the generator, and then he hears his toolbox fall, as the dog bumped it while looking out the window staring at the helicopter with MacReady and Copper returning. The team inspects some Norwegian video footage, and then MacReady and Copper make everyone listen to an audio tape of a man talking in Norwegian. After speaking in a language they don't understand, a violent sound occurs in the recording, with gurgling, hissing, screams, and what sounds like gunshots and carnage. Then they reveal the body, which is most commonly referred to as split face. Blair begins his examination. Meanwhile, Clark leads the dog to the kennel while the rest of the crew enjoy their nightlife. Childs watches TV, Palmer smokes a doobie, MacReady inspects Norwegian tapes at the bar by the rec room as Blair and Copper inspect the cell structure of the body. Copper tells him they should call it a night. At 4:30 in the morning, MacReady is messing with his blow-up doll as he continues watching the Norwegians standing in a circle around something oval in the ice, and then they blow it up. Back at the kennel, the Thing dog approaches a pack of 5 dogs in a corner, and they begin barking, pacing, and feeling threatened. Soon, 3 dogs attack the creature, and chaos ensues. At the bar, MacReady hears the noise, and then races to Clark's room and tells him there's trouble with the dogs. When Clark gets there, 2 dogs run out when he opens the door. Then in the kitchen, MacReady is getting a beer, but he hears a screeching, similar to the sound he heard on the audio tape, and he pulls the fire alarm. At Dogtown, MacReady arrives with a shotgun, with Gary and Norris. Clark tells them whatever is in the kennel is pissed off, and Childs is summoned to bring the flamethrower. When everyone is there, they open the kennel, which is overly dark. In this version, the dogs are aggressively attacking the Thing. They are thrown by the creature, but the canines return to attack the creature viciously again and again. MacReady says he's going to shoot the creature, but Clark charges in, blocking his aim to prevent it, and he hits the Thing with an axe, and then he is thrown back. Then gunfire erupts. and Childs arrives with the flamethrower. He asks about the dogs, but MacReady says screw the dogs, and the room is torched. They then travel to the crash site of the alien ship and return to discuss the situation. Blair then describes the creature and says that it imitates other life forms and that the transformation process is guesstimated to take about an hour to be achieved. Then Blair states the remains are still alive, so the team decide to burn them all. Fuchs is outraged by their actions and tries to stop them from burning the find of the century. However, Childs tosses Fuchs aside, and Copper helps restrain him as they proceed to burn everything. Later, Blair asks Clark how long he was with the dog, and then Blair desperately tries to convince Gary to quarantine the base because Gary is trying to contact McMurdo so he can get help to the facility. It's clear Gary won't listen to Blair. Defeated, Blair stares on, frightened and confused. That night, MacReady is drinking with his inflatable companion and listening to Hawaiian music when he hears clinking outside his shack. He goes out to investigate and discovers that many vehicles have been sabotaged. And then he hears gunshots as Blair goes berserk. They then dump Blair in the shack, just like the movie. Windows is asked to fix the radios, but he states he was never taught how to fix them, and Norris states he doesn't know how to repair them either. Clark then runs up, stating that the last 3 surviving dogs ran off, and they've got a good start. MacReady states he's going to hunt them down, and he's going to use 2 functioning snowmobiles. Gary is against the idea, but he's ignored. The team consists of Childs, Bennings, and MacReady. After a short drive, they find 1 dog dead and burn it, and then they find another dog sitting in the snow with its back to them. When they approach, a thing attacks from below the ground and kills Bennings, while the sitting dog that was bait starts to turn into a thing as well. Childs torches the dog first and then torches the other thing that is so huge that it flails out and damages one of the snowmobiles. The 2 head back to camp before it turns dark, and the script makes sure to note that for the next 6 months, Outpost 31 will be in complete darkness, and if they leave the compound during night, it's deadly. Inside the compound, Clark is being interrogated by everyone. They accuse him of letting the dogs go. Childs almost gets violent with Clark, and Knowles steps in between both men. MacReady then enters the room and drops shredded clothing down, stating that the size is large, and someone amongst them is the Thing. Copper then thinks up a serum test using plasma in storage, and Gary gives him the keys to get to work. They then deduce that the dogs turned into things after they bit into the creature the night before. Of course, the blood is sabotaged and accusations fly. Windows runs for a gun. He's talked down, and MacReady takes leadership after Norris passes. MacReady first orders everyone to stay together. Gary, Copper, and Clark are tied up and given morphine. Palmer states he was by the dogs too, hoping he can get doped up as well, but everyone ignores him. They plan to sleep in shifts. Half of the group is expected to be awake at all times until they figure out who's who. They also make rules that anyone who is away from the rec room longer than 20 minutes must be killed. That way, they think, there won't be enough time for the Thing to absorb into another being. Fuchs states everyone should make their own meals. When Blair is fed, he refuses to eat, and he states he won't be sedated anymore. He then starts boarding up his shack from inside, stating he doesn't trust any of them. Meanwhile, everyone is working in teams, taking apart vehicles and anything that can be used to escape, even weather balloons. All of a sudden, the generator goes out. Copper giggles in the dark thanks to his morphine, and when the emergency lights come back on, Gary is gone. Mac and Palmer go to the generator, while in another area, a person walks by Fuchs in the dark. When everyone gets back together, it is explained a lot of stuff is missing, like wires, kitchen utensils, etc. It is then that they realize Fuchs is unaccounted for. Gary is tied back up. They decide to go find Fuchs and kill him. Norris is to guard the men tied up. Windows, Knowles, and MacReady head to Blair's. but Windows gets separated from them. When they get to Blair's shack, they ask if he's seen Fuchs, and Blair asks to come back inside, but they ignore his request. Back in the rec room, Copper states he's worried about Norris, who is rubbing his chest. Then Palmer and Childs enter their room at another part of the facility, and both are depressed at the sight of their lovely marijuana plants destroyed by snow, and cold thanks to the roof of their room being damaged. Palmer tells Childs not to touch the plants because the thing might have copied them, and Childs responds, "What's it gonna do, being a plant?" which is a nice nod to the 1951 film. Anyways, Palmer tells him to burn them. Child hesitates, but then Palmer torches the plants. Though Childs is angry, it fades when they discover the body of Fuchs with an axe embedded in his chest, hanging against a door. They try to take him down, but the axe is so firmly into the wood they can't remove it. It is then that Windows arrives. The three men head back to the rec room, musing that the creature killed Fuchs because it had no time to assimilate him, and that Fuchs was the only one who could have figured out a test for the creature, and that's why he's dead. After waiting, everyone grows impatient that Knowles and MacReady have not yet returned, and then suddenly Knowles appears and states that he discovered tattered garments belonging to MacReady, and therefore cut him loose. But MacReady returns begging to be let back in, and states he's half frostbit. Norris states he's not had enough time to change into a thing, but then MacReady gets a piece of dynamite after breaking into the storage room window. Norris has his heart attack, and then Copper hits him with a defibrillator. In this version, Copper scrambles off Norris and survives as the Norris thing starts to change. MacReady torches the creature, and then he notices parts of it moving by themselves while burning, unlike human flesh, and therefore he devises the hot needle test. Clark is standing ready to be tested, but he goes after MacReady with a scalpel and is shot in the head, dead, proving he was human. Then MacReady does the blood test, just like the film. The first to be cleared is Copper, and all dialogue is the same until Palmer's blood jumps. The Palmer thing changes while charging MacReady, and the creature ends up on the floor with MacReady punching its face, while the other two people are dragged with it. In an unbelievable moment, MacReady survives this. Unfortunately, Copper does not survive, and dies like Windows did in the movie. MacReady then throws a piece of dynamite into a mouth of the evolving creature, and pieces of it fly everywhere in the room. Back to the blood test, Knowles is cleared, then Windows, then Childs, then Gary, who doesn't like to be tied to the chair in the script as well. They then head to Blair's shack, where they find the door open and an unfinished ship below. They blow up the shack, and then they head to the facility when the guideline breaks thanks to the thing that charges them before they can get back to base. Childs gets lost in the snow, while MacReady, Knowles, Windows, and Gary get to the rec room, and each are armed with Molotov cocktails and dynamite. They rig the main doorway with 1,000 volts of electricity, like the team did in The Thing from Another World. They try to block off the other entrances, and MacReady plans to blow the main generator, thus making the only available safe place the rec room that is filled with portable heaters, so the creature will freeze or come to them. MacReady also hands out cyanide capsules to everyone, stating it's better to kill yourself than become a thing. Then the thing appears, ripping through the kitchen walls. It is huge and grabs Windows as he is dragged away, looking at Knowles pleadingly. Windows bites down on his cyanide capsule. Knowles runs for it and passes MacReady, not looking back. MacReady joins Knowles, and they all meet up by the trap doorway, where they wait in darkness. 2 hours later, they are still waiting. Then the thing crashes through the roof again, and MacReady and Knowles throws cocktails at the creature as Gary is killed by it. The creature can't be stopped, and MacReady jumps out a window to avoid death, and Knowles crawls to a bathroom with a broken leg. The creature stops outside the bathroom door, making sounds against the door, while Knowles desperately pulls up a board and slits his own throat with a nail from that board. Then, MacReady drives a tractor into the lab. He has a stick of dynamite in his mouth. He continues to ram the vehicle through many walls, yelling at the creature, "Okay, creep, just you and me now." Be on your toes, we're gonna do a little remodeling. Many hydrogen tanks line the tractor, and MacReady stops in the rec room, taunting the beast to show itself. It rises from the floor and grabs the tractor. MacReady then throws his dynamite and runs. As the stick explodes, the hydrogen tanks ignite, causing the creature to disintegrate. When it's all over, most of the camp is in flames or ruined. MacReady goes to the pub area, lights a cigar, and pours himself a drink. Then Childs appears. Childs asks if he killed it, and then MacReady sits at a chess table, both men suspicious of each other. They state they will not make it, and then MacReady asks him if he plays chess. I guess I'll be learning. They both smile, and MacReady hands Childs the bottle, which he takes a swig from. Credits then fall. As you can see, there was a lot different in this script. A lot of stuff not in the movie was filmed. And here are some of the scenes Carpenter deliberately deleted from his rough cut. Firstly, he cut any scene with MacReady and his doll friend. Secondly, Child's pot plants were removed from the film. Thirdly, MacReady arguing not to fly to the Norwegian camp was cut in favor of making MacReady more a hero at the beginning, rather than having him grow into the role like the script had him do. The fourth change were a lot of talking moments, where the men stood around, were removed. A perfect example of a scene that changed was the I Know I'm Human scene. It was originally filmed in the rec room, and the dialogue was quite different, with Keith David and Richard Masur having more interaction thanks to their efforts. This scene was completely dropped, and later refilmed on location in Alaska, with Kurt talking more outside the compound at night. Another scene that changed was Fuchs' death, as Carpenter thought that scene made the movie too slasher, even though Bill Lancaster wrote this scene this way to match Carpenter's sensibilities. Scene number 6 that was removed was the death scene of Bennings. Since they didn't go into the Arctic to chase 3 dogs, they changed Bennings' death to him looking in the dog kennel, and someone who was unidentified comes up behind him and kills him. The sad thing about cutting some of these scenes was some of the character elements were lost, such as Clark and Child's disdain for each other. But all these cuts were made in a week and a half, and when finished, John took a weekend off to think about what he was going to do next. The following Monday morning, John called the producers, production designer John Lloyd, and production manager Robert Brown into his office, and he had new scenes that he wrote himself ready to distribute. John then talked his team through his changes, and these became the new structure of the film. The new scenes were Xeroxed pages and were never melded into scripts. So you don't find these scenes in scripts unless they are made after the production for posterity reasons. None of the actors knew about these scene changes until they arrived on location after their time off. Richard Masur stated that in his eyes the movie changed drastically when they relocated to Alaska. The changes were sure to cause some problems with the cast, as John was the type of director that expected actors to do their job while he did his. Some actors had already complained that they sat around too much while Bottin did his magic, and outside of Russell, Carpenter felt a little apart from the ensemble. A group dynamic had developed, a byproduct of the 2-week rehearsal period that was convened before production, and a number wanted the running dialogue kept up. This dynamic mirrored the Thing's central theme. Some of the cast didn't fully trust John to watch their backs. For his part, John thought some were prone to paranoia, acting like little children, for feeling shunted aside in favor of the monster. For my part, I didn't like the thought of cast and director isolated from one other. 31 and some odd years later, I feel sure some of this real-life dynamic infiltrated and probably enriched the final product. Carpenter then flew off to Alaska with some of the crew to settle in and prepare for the cast members. When the second group with the actors flew in, they had a long bus ride, which would take them to the border of Higher Alaska and Stewart, British Columbia. During this bus ride, the bus began to slide. The moment it happened, the bus driver yelled out their danger, and everyone was alert. As to the severity of the bus slide, some actors say that one of the wheels actually went over a cliff and dangled. Other actors say the moment was embellished for dramatic reasons. So, which is true, you will have to research and decide for yourself. Nevertheless, there was danger. In the back of the bus, Tom Waits was, in his words, partying and drinking. Those in the bus noted that Russell immediately switched into his character. By taking charge, he instructed everyone, one by one, starting with Waits, to crawl slowly from the back of the bus to the front and exit the vehicle. Everyone made it off safely, and then the occupants pushed and pulled the bus back on track. After driving wide awake and alert, the group got to a hotel entrance, and then the truck got stuck again. The team left the bus and made their way up to the hotel, only to learn that it was closed. So they returned to the bus, unstuck it, and kept going. When everyone arrived to meet the others, John was there and shook each cast member's hand as they got off the bus. Rather than just throw them into work, Carpenter gave them a day to get used to their new environment. But they did have a sit-down to talk about the changes John recently made to the film. John covered the scenes that were deleted and the new scenes they would film, and why he was doing them. He asked the actors for their help to see this through over the next difficult weeks, so they could get the hell off the mountain in time for Christmas. The location compound where the actors worked looked wonderful, but heaters couldn't be used at full, because if they did, it would melt the snow on the roofs. And that meant it would screw up continuity whenever they filmed outside. So the actors and crew had to rough it out a bit. To get an idea for the daily routine, actors took a bus ride that had snow chains on its wheels from the hotel 45 minutes to the set. When there, they would usually assemble and hang out in the rec room when waiting between shots. Those not doing camera work would just hang out there. They played ping pong tournaments, read magazines, and read books to pass the time. Whenever the shoot was over, they would take a 45-minute drive back to their hotel. Filming occurred in December. MacReady was given a lot more focus. The new death with Bennings using tentacles and KY jelly was also filmed to show assimilation on screen, and Bennings' hands are the same ones used by Palmer because money was tight. To push the sorrow and horror of Bennings' new death, they filmed the Donald Moffat scene, where he laments his friendship to Bennings and the trouble he has understanding what happened. Finally, Fuchs's new death had to be filmed, and it was down to the wire. They had little time or money, and Carpenter asked the associate producer, Larry Franco, what their limitations would be on realizing Fuchs's demise. You can do whatever the hell you want, as long as it took 3 hours. So they quickly filmed Joel Polis's last moments, and then filmed MacReady and friends finding his body. It did take under 3 hours to do all that. As money started to get tight, the budget was raised, and often this would fall to Stuart Cohen to get the money from the studio. To save money, Stuart stated that rather than build a new set for the ruined Norwegian camp, he suggested filming the back of their location burnt and in shambles for the Norwegian base. This alone saved the project $250,000. They would save even more money by using decals on one side of the helicopter to represent Norwegian and the other side for American. After location filming was finished, some extra pickup shots were done in California, like Blair sitting at his computer watching cells consume other cells to show the audience just how hopeless the situation would be if the thing got loose. Now, in truth, there are many things in filming that we did not cover, like Richard Masser working with Jed and Peter Maloney being terrified of the dog. And the truth is, I could make a whole nother video covering stories while filming. I will touch on some of these stories when we go over the movie scene by scene, but I don't intend on covering every little story out there, especially the ones most repeated. And this finally brings us to post-production. When post came around, there was so much to finish up. John was crunched for time, and now the score needed to be focused on and taken over by someone other than John. At first, they tried Jerry Goldsmith, then John Corigliano, and then Alex North. It was Stuart Cohen who suggested Ennio Morricone. At first, Morricone passed, but then they made an Italian script for him and sent him a bottle of wine. Then they met him in Rome for 2 days. They tried to talk about what they wanted with the help of a translator because they didn't speak the same language. And finally, John just sat at a piano and keyed music to break the language barrier. Carpenter and Morricone definitely spoke that language, and that's when John hired him. On the plane ride back, John worried that he didn't communicate what he wanted well enough, but those fears passed when they heard Morricone's Heartbeat track, which was used for the main title, and John sighed in relief. In truth, Morricone batted the score out of the park, as it is perfect for the film John made. Rather than cover score details during the movie, I will hit on it here by saying the main titles and the credits emulate palpable, unnatural paranoia, and this perfectly represents the film. And the main title is not my favorite track of the film. I can listen to despair and humanity over and over again. These are the tracks when they find the ship, and when Blair looks at the computer, contemplating the end of the world. I don't feel I have to say another word to press my point how objectively masterful this score was for this film. There was even a moment when Carpenter had a desire to change the name of the movie to Who Goes There, because he worried it would be confused with Swamp Thing, but nothing ever came of that. Carpenter then focused on the logo of the film, which he planned to do honoring the 1951 version. He also wanted to have the arrival of a spaceship to Earth made. James Cameron was one of the folks competing to remake the logo, but Peter Curran won the job instead. After the film was finished, John screened it for Joe Dante at his house, and Dante loved it. However, coming up was the test audiences and the studio, and that is yet another story. The Thing was originally slated to come out during the fall of 1982, as it was a cold film and matched that season. But there was one thing that historically would sabotage The Thing's release, and that was Cat People. Cat People was supposed to be Universal's big movie for the year, and the studio really thought it was going to be a blockbuster. But there were problems making that movie, and it did not turn out to be the big success Universal hoped for. Therefore, Universal decided to move The Thing to June to make money quicker. Things escalated when theater distributors began asking about The Thing because there were no pictures of the monster out there, and there were no huge stars in the film beyond Russell. They thought it was just a B-movie that wouldn't attract large audiences and would be just another horror film that was pretty common during the 80s. So in mid-March, some of the producers were sent out to big cities to advertise the film using a 20-minute reel that consisted of various scenes but little monster effects.
John Carpenter's The Thing. Anytime, anywhere, anyone. Coming from Universal this summer.
The response was not terrible, since it looked action-y. They even had some nifty display stands, as you can see here, to give highlights of the film to anyone who saw it. After showing the footage to distributors, Stuart Cohen got a phone call from Robert Remy, Universal's head of distribution. He told me the studio was really counting on The Thing to pull them through the summer. They had just had their first look at E.T., the extraterrestrial, and considered it, in his words, soft. A movie aimed at children. They thought it would be up to us to appeal to the demographic they coveted, teenagers on up. We took this pep talk in stride, having no idea what was in store for us the next few months. The crushing tragedy of all this was that Universal dumped The Thing into a release slot right next to E.T. and Poltergeist, which was a death sentence for the movie's marketing. Because E.T. wasn't a soft movie, it became a giant and swallowed up all media for movies at this time. The first preview for the film was on Friday night in late May 1982 at the Red Rock Theater in Las Vegas, and the theater was not full. Afterwards, they were going through the cards, having audience opinions, and the opinions towards the film were mainly average to fair. Audiences were a bit bothered by the ambiguity of the ending as well. Then they previewed the film in Denver, and the audience just wasn't praising the film there either. And once again, many were confused about the ending. When the team got back to Universal Monday morning, the studio wanted to look at options to having a different ending. So they had Verna Fields, who we covered extensively in our Jaws 2 video, to take a look at the film. Verna tried to create a cut where MacReady sat alone without Childs, leaving MacReady to die in isolation, a lone hero. After Verna made the changes, the studio screened the movie again with both endings. So in one house, they played MacReady dying alone, and in the other house, they played the original ending with Childs and MacReady. The questions on the questionnaires for the audience was, do you like or dislike the ending? And do you like or dislike the film? The response was that the ending with MacReady alone was slightly preferable by about 5% more than the original ending. And so the team responsible for making The Thing agreed half-heartedly to go with the studio's desired ending. But then on Monday, the makers lobbied once again, just a day before the prints had to be made by the lab. They made a case that 5% wasn't enough to change the ending. It didn't make a difference, and they wanted to keep the film the way it was. Ned Tannen, a bigwig at Universal, finally relented to their request to keep the original ending as long as they had a scream of the thing dying, which would be inserted at the end of the film so the audience could have some solace that the creature had a death scream. In the end, the studio did not look kindly on The Thing after the premiere. They considered it bereft of narrative drive, lacking proper character development, and was dull, confusing, and slow. The studio was annoyed that there was not enough music to help move along the movie, as there were parts of tension with no music. Perfect example was the blood scene. Finally, the crew screening was held on June 11th, 1982 at Alfred Hitchcock Theater, while John was still in Tennessee working on Firestarter. The theater was packed as E.T. was selling out like gangbusters, with lines outside, but the theater allowed 3 small screening rooms for The Thing. At the end of the screening, matte painter Albert Whitlock approached Stuart Cohen and stated that he was offended by the film's gore, and stated his wife left the movie the moment the kennel scene occurred and she didn't return. Russell was also a bit disappointed. His initial reaction was not positive, believing that much of the hard work, relationship work done by the actors from rehearsal on, was left on the cutting room floor in favor of what he called the ick factor. The rest of the cast, in Cohen's words, felt the same way. But the execs at Universal made sure to put the kibosh on everything. One came up to Cohen shrugging, and then said, "Well, it is an E.T." After the crew screening, they opened up the 3 screening rooms. As folks left smiling after seeing E.T., folks left The Thing somber, and the support for the film was muted by the studio. This caused promotion funds for the film to dwindle instantly. Firstly, because E.T. was so huge, Universal felt it was getting all the money they wanted from that film, and to them it was logical to invest more money advertising E.T. to keep it in the zeitgeist. The other reason was that the studio heads saw The Thing as a missed opportunity. Per Stuart Cohen's recollection, the studio totally changed the original poster that was firstly black and white. Their replacement for this poster was the Glowface poster. To show how inept studio execs were, Universal head Sid Sheinberg himself demanded the word alien be used for the tagline of the film because he wanted to suggest a connection to the 1979 film rather than see The Thing as its own entity. This caused the line, "The ultimate in alien terror to be used in ads, and this led to the merchandising. I want to tell you that The Thing had a lot of merchandise to help it get awareness to the film community, with stuff like shirts, mugs, statues, figures, and such. But the truth was, Universal didn't care enough to support this film. So if you were a moviegoer in 1982, the most you could get was a Thing poster, a soundtrack on cassette or LP, or the novel by Alan Dean Foster, who was commissioned by Universal Studios and never had access to the filmmakers. Instead, Foster worked off an outdated script that did not have any of the Carpenter changes before the crew went to location. But now the moment had come, and it was time for The Thing to be released at the box office. The summer box office of 1982 was mammoth, and it started out with Arnold Schwarzenegger making a name for himself as Conan the Barbarian. For the kids, Annie was singing up a storm, while Rocky returned to face Clubber Lang in Rocky III. On June 4th, 1982, two more huge movies came out, the first being Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and the other was the creepy and Spielbergian horror film Poltergeist, which we will cover someday on this channel. But the real creature of the summer came out on June 11th, and that was E.T. E.T. destroyed everything pretty much for the rest of the year, and went on to become the highest-grossing film of all time. Michelle Pfeiffer found her first starring role in Grease 2, but coming out the same week as E.T. was definitely not a good thing, and in the end, the sequel made minimal impact at the box office. On June 18th, Clint Eastwood tried to steal The Firefox, but in the end it didn't steal any thunder away from E.T. Al Pacino tried to be a family man in Author, but once again it was no big competition for all the other big films slugging it out at the box office. On June 25th, Megaforce tried to save the world, but no one in the world noticed because they were at the movies checking out E.T. During that same week, Blade Runner was released. Blade Runner was completely rejected by audiences and critics, which was ironic because the same thing would happen to The Thing. And The Thing arrived at theaters the same day Blade Runner did. There was a special screening for The Thing at the Hollywood Pacific Theater, with Elvira hosting the events. Awards were given out to those in monster costumes. It was more about the costumes and less about the movie, but at least it was something. Meanwhile, E.T. just sucked all attention away from The Thing, and it made little. After its Friday and Saturday opening, things did not look good. By Sunday morning, after its premiere, Universal Vice President Helena Hacker reported that the film didn't open well, and that it would lose 50% of its theaters during the second week. Stuart Cohen would go to visit John at his house to report this, and stated that the director was stricken, like he had been punched in the gut. During that second week of release on July 2nd, 1982, The Wonderful Secret of NIMH came out. The following week, Tron would arrive, and this was The Thing's last week in cinemas, basically. In the end, The Thing would only make $20 million domestically. The movie was simply crushed by other films at the time, and audiences who saw the film and liked it had little ability to spread good word of mouth, because by the time they said anything good, the film had already left theaters, and the critics simply brutalized the film.
And the movie just basically is an excuse for this very gruesome and repellent creature to gross us out. It is the most nauseating thing I've ever seen on a movie screen, I think.
The critical reaction to The Thing was just torture for the makers of the film. Some of the wonderful reviews left were, "The Thing is bereft, despairing and nihilistic, lacking in feeling, meaning the characters' deaths did not matter. The Thing is entertaining, only if the viewer needed to see spider-legged heads and dog autopsies. A foolish, depressing, overproduced movie, aspiring to be the quintessential moron movie of the 1980s. What's most shocking is that the sci-fi horror community even turned on The Thing. And the ridiculous thing is, this reviewer noted that the film has bad continuity, which it does not at all. Regardless of this is what Starlog magazine said. It has no pace, sloppy continuity, bland characters. It's my contention that John Carpenter was never meant to direct science fiction horror movies. My only reaction to this is, here are some things he'd be better suited to direct: traffic accidents, train wrecks, and public floggings. Carpenter was bashed left and right, and the film was called gore porn of a sort, and it hit Carpenter pretty hard. I take every failure hard. The one I took the hardest was The Thing. My career would have been different if that had been a big hit. The movie was hated, even by science fiction fans. They thought I had betrayed some kind of trust, and the piling on was insane. Even the original movie's director, Christian Nyby, was dissing me. And what did the questionable director of the Howard Hawks' 1951 The Thing from Another World say about the man who loved his film and honored it in Halloween? If you want blood, go to the slaughterhouse. All in all, it's a terrific commercial for J&B Scotch. Carpenter tried to weather the storm and focused on moving forward with Stephen King's Firestarter, but Universal made things worse when they terminated John from the project as a reaction to The Thing's fallout. Even Stuart Cohen had a film in the works with another studio that involved John Carpenter called Only Angels Have Wings, but that was canned too. In short, John was currently labeled a pariah in Hollywood, but John wouldn't have to wait long because a producer named Richard Kobritz, who owned the rights to Christine, wanted him to direct the film from the start of conception, regardless of the backlash, because he worked with him on the 1978 television film Someone's Watching Me. Carpenter would take the job more out of necessity than desire. It just wasn't very frightening, but it was something I needed to do at the time for my career. Regardless, John would bounce back, and thank God, because we have a lot more of his films to cover that were just wonderful in the future. A big thing about the early 80s was that after Halloween in 1978, there were tons of slasher films coming out on a regular basis, and there was a lot of disdain, especially in critical circles, for that genre.
This movie is about the 7th direct ripoff of Halloween. Another mad slasher going after mostly women victims, this time in a coal mining town. I'm really getting sick of these pictures.
I think The Thing suffered partly because of that disdain. On top of that was the extreme reality of The Thing. It was hopeless and didn't apologize one bit for depicting it. The early 80s was about having pride in your country. The biggest songs during June were Eye of the Tiger about winning, Ebony and Ivory about understanding, and families were cheering about the wonder of E.T. The time wasn't ready for The Thing or Blade Runner. It was just too optimistic of a period in our history where our stars were muscle-bound and practically every woman on screen was a model. In The Thing, some of the men looked like they didn't shower for days, which was a reality for folks working in such Arctic outposts. It was gritty and it was grim. It was, in my opinion, the opposite of its time, and general audiences and critics just were not ready for it. Yet there were a lot of us, like myself, that simply loved this film in the early and mid-80s, and I think it's time we start talking about the movie itself. If you ever watched one of my videos before, like The Hitcher or Basic Instinct, you will know, as a viewer, I would never tell you how to watch a movie. Your view is paramount, and I kind of feel it's ridiculous to note this in any video, but the truth is we live in a culture where a large portion of the population gets emotional or offended when folks have a differing view with them. In the end, I say watch the movie and believe whatever. This channel doesn't have to affect your viewing experience unless you choose for it to affect your viewing experience. I am not an arbiter of movie thought. Therefore, there's no need to leave nasty comments if you are so passionate about this movie that I must agree with your view. With that said, we are going to point out some minor things that have been made into debated theories, and we are going to address the ones that have been debunked by the filmmakers themselves and are just not logical, right, wrong, or indifferent. So take it as you will. The first theory we are going to ignore at this channel is the spark of life in the eye theory. A lot of theorists out there state that whenever you see a character without a gleam in their eye, they are a thing. And this is simply not the case, as there is only one sequence in the film where the gleam in the eye mattered, and that was the blood test. Dean Cundey stated he specifically did the gleam in the eye for that scene only, and it was he that consciously made the effort to light the blood scene himself. When filming the end of the movie, and other scenes in the film, the spark of light was not paid attention to, especially during the last scene. Theorists are dead set that because Keith David has no light in his eye, he was a thing at the end, and it is simply conjecture on the theorist's part, because this is Dean Cundey's take.
When we did the ending with Keith and Kurt as the last two, there was no real effort because John had said, no, we don't know. The ending is left ambiguous. But, so it was a case of, doing one thing, and now it's sort of grown into a lot of people hoping that they could figure it out.
Another theory that specifically targets the end of the film is that Childs must be a thing, because you can't see his breath, and since the thing doesn't need lungs, it doesn't breathe like Russell, and therefore he's a thing. This is just a stupid theory, and I am in great disagreement with it, because look at this thing, which had less time to change compared to Childs if he was one. Oh boy, it has a breath. I wonder why. How about this? Oh boy, I thought things didn't have organs like humans. Why is it being affected by a human heart condition? Well, this is obvious, in that the thing replicates humans perfectly, including our frailties and biology. And it maintains that form until it's ready to change. To add insult to injury, in later home media releases, Childs does in fact have breath in the cold if you look closely. Then there's the theory that this film is a direct correlation to the AIDS epidemic. Unfortunately, history does not match this at all, and it's really retroactive gobbledygook. Firstly, the film was based very closely to the novella, made in the 1940s, and there was no such thing as AIDS in the 1940s. Following the book was the core motivation for the creation of the film, and it can't be ignored. The movie's mood and approach is very similar to the novella as well. It is not trying to send some message about a disease that wasn't even defined by the World Health Organization until 1986, some 4 years after the movie released. And to push this point, the first case of AIDS was clinically reported on June 5th, 1981, after the script was finished. The word AIDS was not even introduced until a meeting with the CDC in July 1982, weeks after the movie released. In September 1982, the CDC officially announced the name of the new virus as AIDS. The Thing was already out of theaters by this time. It is simply revisionist history, and many of the actors of the film stated that AIDS was never a thought in their minds when making the movie. Some audiences who insist believing in this theory retroactively can believe it if they want, but it does not line up with the facts. With those quick things covered, let's begin the film itself. Now, a lot of folks debate who is piloting the alien spacecraft, and the truth is, we just don't know. And you have to believe what you want to. If you believe the 2011 Thing movie as canon, the creature did know how to pilot the craft. The problem is, if you see the 2011 film as canon, there's really a bad plot problem there. If the ship did crash, why didn't the Thing just restart it and fly away? Because according to that film, the ship is fine, because the creature returns to it after destroying the Norwegian base. It starts it up with no problem and is about to fly away when it dies. It's easy to say the Thing brought parts to the ship and write the script for the storytellers, but at the same time, the Thing didn't have much time to put in those parts as someone was chasing right behind them. An odd moment for the film is that this dog has been shot in the hind leg, and it is being chased, and unlike a normal dog, it stops and desperately tries to get the attention of this man while still in the fight or flight mode. This is easily overlooked by most audiences, but at the same time, it denotes the devious and manipulative nature of the Thing. And we will cover why this dog is so incessantly licking him in just a little bit. Peter Malone was terrified of dogs, as he had an incident with a really bad dog. Nevertheless, he saw this scene through. Now, the Norwegian ranting for everyone to get away from the dog was named Jans Bolin in the original script, the novel, and deleted footage. Now, if I was the Norwegian, I would have parked that helicopter between the base and the dog. That way, I could have a clear line of fire as it comes towards the base. But that's not what happened. Instead, they circle around, get behind the dog, and then land as the dog enters the base. When Jans is on the ground, trying to communicate with the members of Outpost 31, he spoils the whole movie, if you knew Norwegian. And this is the translation for what he says in the film. Get the hell away. That's not a dog. It's some sort of thing. It's imitating a dog. It isn't real. Get away, you idiots. Now, the script states that the men of Outpost 31 were commissioned by the United States National Science Foundation to gather data concerning the physical and natural sciences of the continent of Antarctica. Rather than wait till later in the film, let's take a look at the crew of Outpost 31 per actor's insights and the script insights. Station Chief M.T. Gary was played by Donald Moffat. He was an ex-Army officer who runs the base. He has no patience for nonsense, and when things are normal, he is an adequate leader. Geologist Vance Norris, played by Charles Hallahan, is suggested to be close friends to Gary, and that's why he offers him the leadership. But there is no verification that he was the bona fide second-in-command. However, Norris is not a leader at all. He's a follower, as throughout the film you will notice him never taking the lead. Not only does he pass the top spot, he follows other people's assumptions, like he did when everyone was trying to kill MacReady. He followed the rest of the group without any resistance or say. Of course, you could say he was a thing and trying to kill the human Russell, but we'll get to that later. According to Kurt Russell and John Carpenter per the DVD commentary, R.J. MacReady was in the Vietnam War.
Didn't we talk about the Vietnam helicopter idea?
Yeah, that he had some experience and was probably an alcoholic now. And what was interesting about it was that here was this guy who was up in Antarctica with all these other guys who had their own problems for wanting to be up there. But this guy had to get a little further away than most. So.
Another source states that after he left Vietnam, he got a job at Hughes Aircraft. as a test pilot, but he got in trouble with some management and ended up at Outpost 31. MacReady is an all-or-nothing man. Death or success, there is no between. He will choose death to stop the thing in a heartbeat. A nice foreshadow of this is how he plays chess. When he loses, he destroys the chess computer. When it comes down to the thing, when he's gonna lose, he destroys the base. The parallels can't be missed. He makes the decisions which mirrors Carpenter's view on many things, such as this quote, "Directing is about deciding. When you direct, decide." MacReady perfectly encapsulates John's attitude. Mechanic and backup pilot Palmer was played by David Clennon. According to John Carpenter, Palmer suffers substance abuse issues and he's been in and out of rehab. He is now at Outpost 31 trying to rebuild his life. When clean, he's a great mechanic, but he's a fairly inexperienced pilot compared to MacReady. Palmer is a conspiracy theorist and close friends with Childs, who is his roommate and fellow mechanic. As for Childs, like MacReady, you learn a lot about him in the movie. He's played by Keith David, and the only thing that's not really in the movie is that Childs grew up in Detroit, and he despises Clark. Speaking of Clark, he was depicted by Richard Masur, and he is the dog handler of the base. It's well known that Clark loves the dogs and the isolation of Outpost 31. He relates more to his dogs than he does the people there, and we tried to locate all of the dog names, but the names we could discover were Nanook, Archangel, Lobo, and Buck, per the novel. He is quiet and serious, the opposite of Childs, and therefore they don't get along. Chief Biologist Blair is overworked and edgy and played by Wilford Brimley perfectly. His assistant is Biologist Fuchs, played by Joel Polis. Fuchs is sensitive, intelligent, and he's very trusting of Copper and MacReady, and he is just as bright as Blair. The physician of the base is Dr. Copper, played by Richard Dysart. The only things I could find on him was that he's professional, a decent man, and a good doctor. George Bennings, who is a meteorologist, played by Peter Malone, also doesn't have a lot about him, except that he's an old pro and close friends with Gary. T.K. Carter plays the cook Knowles. Honestly, Knowles is the most likable character of the group, as he is fun and free-spirited. As things turn sour, he becomes the most sympathetic and nervous of the group, thus being most of the audience's point of view. For those scared during the movie theater experience, Windows, played by Thomas G. Waits, was a good avatar for those people. Windows is the radio operator, and according to Thomas Waits, Windows wanted to be in Hollywood, but his life didn't turn out the way he wanted, and now he hates it, and he hates where he ended up, Outpost 31. He has little enthusiasm for his job, and therefore doesn't do a great one. Unlike Knowles, Windows is portrayed as panicky and sometimes cowardly. So now that we've gone over the crew, let's take a look at the new arrival at the base. The Thing dog was played by Jed, and Jed was part Malamute and wolf, and Richard Masur loved working with this dog. Unlike most dogs, the wolf side of Jed was prevalent, and that meant when startled, the wolf would stare or go quiet. It didn't growl or show agitation, and when the dog would get that look, everyone had to be mindful and careful on the set, because when the dog was in that state, you had to move slower or it could become dangerous. However, this never happened on the set because trainer Clint Rowe kept everyone and the dog in check. The only people the dog wouldn't work around was Charles Hallahan and Kurt Russell. Charles was so nervous around the dog that it would throw off the dog's performance. As far as Kurt Russell, the dog did not relax around him. The dog would not go near Russell or look at him in any way, except with caution. It was assumed it was because Russell worked around animals like horses and had that scent on him, but in the end, the dog simply couldn't stand being around Russell, and therefore they never shared a scene together. After the dog goes nuts licking Bennings, you can see Clark sewing up its gunshot wound in the next scene. And now it's time to discuss one of the biggest elements of this movie, and that involves the dog licking Bennings desperately during the beginning. The film establishes the fact that the thing does not only assimilate you violently, but it can infect you virally, which is why later Fuchs says this.
If a small particle of this thing is enough to take over an entire organism, then everyone should prepare their own meals, and I suggest we only eat out of cans.
This conversation occurred on the 4th day of the movie, and we will specifically go over that timeline later in the video. Suffice it to say, we want to lay out the true horror of the situation the crew at Outpost 31 is in. And the next time you watch this movie, keep what I'm about to lay out in mind. And to start us off, let's see what the first person infected had to say about when the dog was licking him.
And then he starts bumping my face like this, bang, 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 bang. And who knows? I'm not supposed to know, nobody's supposed to know that he is infected, the dog's infecting me with the virus.
In Who Goes There, the team deduced that the creature was also like a disease, and there was a lot of discussion about it, and this movie copied that book loyally. So it makes complete sense that the dog thing thinks it's about to die, and desperately, it spreads some of its saliva all over Bennings in a last-ditch effort to survive. You can see it is licking him so much that he has to push it away and try to block it. This stands to reason that if the thing drank from a bottle you were swigging, you would be infected too. But the question is, how long does it take for an infection to take hold and morph a person? We're going to go through the movie step by step, looking at the germ chain that we see and who could be infected by the thing by germs alone. We're not saying they're infected, but what we are showing you is just how dangerous the situation is for them. Once again, if you believe Blair's notes that Fuchs discusses with Russell, then it's a pretty concrete case to how hopelessly screwed this team is, without the creature even revealing itself to them. So first up, the dog got saliva all over Bennings, and then Russell gives Bennings his J&B, and look at the gloved hand he grabs it with. It's the same one the dog was licking profusely. He then drinks from said bottle, and it's easily debatable that he's infected at that point, even if the dog's licks missed his mouth, which it didn't, according to the actor. A lot of folks say MacReady becomes the thing because it was his bottle, but we never see Bennings give him that bottle back. We do see MacReady drinking with the J&B bottle later, but one thing this place has plenty of is alcohol at the bar. And look, boxes of the stuff right here. There are most likely cases of J&B for MacReady to replace the bottle he gave Bennings. So we can't assume that it's the same bottle he's drinking out of, like some of those theorists insist is the case. Then the dog goes into a room with a shadow, and we will cover this one in a bit, as right now we are only focused on germs. We have to do this one theory at a time, so we lay the groundwork. The person in the shadow is either Palmer or Norris, and it's important to keep that in mind, and we'll go into that later. Now I want you to notice that the biologists and doctors have gloves on as they examine the bodies, so they are following somewhat sterile procedures. But I want you to notice Fuchs, who is examining some ripped up clothing. He's doing it with his bare hands. Hopefully dude washes his hands, because if there are thing cells on that from an attack, well, you know where I'm going with this. At the end of the first night, we know that Palmer or Norris is a thing at this point. And if you notice, Palmer is smoking a doobie and Childs puts his hand out to have it passed to him. If Palmer is a thing at this moment, and Childs takes a puff of this doobie, there's a good chance he's infected as well. The thing I never understood is, if Palmer is a thing already, would it not just assimilate Childs during the night? Well, we'll get to that later. Now remember, this dog has been walking around the base for some time, and only at night it goes in the kennel. If I was a thing, and I was intelligent just like the humans and maybe more, I would lick everything someone would touch. when they are not looking to spread my germs. It's a chilling thing to think about. Many fans think Blair got infected when he taps the body of the thing and put his pencil to his mouth afterward. However, if you freeze the scene frame by frame, you can see he gets close to it, but he doesn't put the pencil against it. The guy's a biologist. He would know better. And even if he did touch the creature with the pencil, which he didn't, look at where he rests the pencil. It's not on his lips. It's just under his lips. He wasn't turned here. And we will specifically focus on Blair's turn later. On day 2, Knowles handles some dirty clothes with his bare hands. And then Russell handles them with his bare hands. Think about that for just a second. If you were a thing, wouldn't you want germ-infested clothes in a place where people got stuff they ingested? Now, Knowles is cooking food for everyone, so if he didn't wash his hands, that would infect everyone for sure. But take a look at this scene. Russell's bare hands are inspecting these dirty clothes as well. Then he grabs his bottle with the same hand. It doesn't go on the tip, but there is a fine line that he could have been infected by being so unsanitary. It can be debated. After Blair is sent to the shack, MacReady sips a bottle of alcohol and then puts it to Blair. Once again, if MacReady was polluted in any way up to this point, then Blair would be infected the moment he sips from it as well. However, I'll tell you right now, before Blair goes in the shack, he's already a thing. Don't get mad. Don't leave ugly comments. Let me explain it in a little bit. Then you can razz me all you want. I'll kill you. Finally, we get to Fuchs' moment, where he tells MacReady,
if a small particle of this thing is enough to take over an entire organism, then everyone should prepare their own meals, and I suggest we only eat out of cans.
From this moment on, we won't follow the germ chain, because everyone should be theoretically following Fuchs' suggestion. But this is over 3 days after the dog infiltrated their camp, and we'll go into the specific timeline later. If no one ate or drank from stuff they made alone, how easy would it have been for someone that is the thing to just spit on toothbrushes, lick forks and spoons, or anything like that? Bottom line is that everyone can be infected at this point, and there is no hope against this thing. For all we know, if they didn't do the blood test, everyone would have been turned into a thing in days regardless. Some theorists out there state that MacReady was always the thing since drinking from the bottle that Bennings had, and he is playing a game of chess with the lives at the base in order to be the last one standing. They say he cheats during the blood test and that he is infecting everyone by germs, like the Blair moment. However, if this was so, what about Childs? Childs puffed a joint that was in Palmer's mouth. Would he not be a thing too? Well, I'm sure people can say, well, MacReady switched his blood too. You can go on and on about the germ theory. The point I'm trying to make with all this is that the germ situation is just shockingly morbid and hopeless. There was no escape the moment that dog was licking Bennings and his hand went on that bottle, not to mention the many subtle germ moments that we see in the film after that event. And let's not forget all the little moments we didn't see, consisting of 3 days that were not on screen. The ironic thing about all this is that the germ stuff is just the background threat in this movie. I haven't even talked about the violent assimilation and manipulation this creature uses on its human targets. Now it's time to get real specific about details in the film. And we wanted to be as specific as possible in regards to details, and rather than have a section devoted to the timeline of the film, we are going to incorporate it whenever we know the times of an event in the film. We will note on the bottom of the screen the time and the source of this information, which will be a snapshot of the scene, script, or clock that we get this information from, so you can verify it yourself in the movie. So with that said, we're going to continue. Now that the dog thing has arrived to the base and spread its germs all over Bennings and potentially leads the entire facility into catastrophe, we come to the first deleted scene of the film where Gary inspects Jan's dog tag. But this scene really wasn't necessary, as the sequence with everyone around the table inspecting the body served the information better. An interesting thing about this scene is when Knowles muses that maybe they might be at war with Norway, which, if you think about it, these guys are so far away from everyone that if such a war broke out, how would they know? Thus, this presses the isolation that they suffer out here. After the copter heads out, something is going through each room looking for a target. And the dog finds that target in this room with the shadow. Now, in order to know for sure who this shadow is, that is physically assimilated, there are a few things to consider. Firstly, it can only be Palmer or Norris, as they are the ones that are later seen to be things. It can't be Blair because the mop in that shadow makes Blair envious. The second thing to consider is what the filmmakers originally planned. According to Stuart Cohen, producer of The Thing and the man who got the ball rolling for the project, it was intended to be Palmer. At the time of filming, David Clennan's silhouette was considered too distinct, a dead giveaway. Cinematographer Dean Cundy tried to soften the edges to diffuse the image, but in the end, John used stunt coordinator Dick Warlock to throw off the scent. Dick Warlock was used for quick scenes when they needed to stand in for a performer during a shot where their faces wouldn't be seen. At the Stewart location, Dick played all outdoor Blair scenes because Brimley did not work at the location. He would also play the Palmer monster that was later on the ceiling. He was also one of the Norwegians toasting in the picture, which had other filmmakers in it. When filming the shadow scene, Dean Cundy asked if they should spruce up the hair or something, and Carpenter's response was perfect. No, let's really screw with the audience. Today, the audience is still debating, as a matter of fact, who the image is on the wall, but it's pretty clear from some involved with the film who the shadow is. Palmer. However, I was always on the side that it was Norris for 40 plus years, since I always thought the shadow looked the most like him. But in the end, I won't dismiss what the filmmakers say. I've been to some sites where people try to claim that Cohen's opinions don't matter because the film is ambiguous, and therefore there is no truth. But I don't think myself arrogant enough to dismiss what a person involved with the creation of this movie and all aspects within it, because I want the film to be a certain way. In the end, does it matter? This movie is so perfect in continuity and logic that you can interchange Palmer or Norris as the shadow, and it works with precision. And that's one of the many reasons this film stood the test of time. At the Norwegian base, the ice block was a direct nod to the original Thing from Another World, and there was more deleted footage at the base, which included the body in the closet that we discussed in the earlier script. This scene was cut to better streamline the film. As the first night is ending, a nice touch for the character Windows is you will see he's slacking off on the job sleeping, and when he's woken up he's holding a magazine called Photoplay, which hints about his character's dreams of Hollywood, while Fuchs is soiling his hands and the other two are busy autopsying the bodies. So on the first day, according to Cohen, Palmer would be a thing. So why didn't it kill and replace Childs during the night when they are rooming together? I could only devise two reasons why Childs survived. Firstly, he smoked a joint with Palmer, and therefore he would be already infected with germs. Therefore, why should the creature risk exposure and just let the germs take their course on Childs? I think the creature would have laid low if it could have after obtaining a human body. But unfortunately, the dog kennel occurs, and it didn't count on the other dogs of the facility sniffing it out and making a ruckus. Now, just before all hell breaks loose in the dog pen, At 4:30 a.m. on the second day, per the script, there was a deleted scene where Blair talks about cell structure to his assistant. Once again, this dialogue was better explored after autopsying the dog thing. Which brings us to the hardest scene in the movie for me, because I think the dog kennel scene is just brutal. Honestly, I'm a cat guy, but the dog sounds and performances were just so visceral from the animals, and most of it was special effects work. However, there is a moment that gives me some levity, and that was an appearance by none other than Rob Bottin, and that is during this shot. Yes, that's Rob back there working his device. A funny thing about the dog kennel scene was that the sounds of most of these dogs were taken from a neighborhood, where dogs were put in a room and door handles were being wiggled like crazy to cause the dogs to bark and go nuts. Now, the flower projectile that tries to come at Childs was really dog tongues with teeth. Yuck. Now, there are two takes to the fate of the dog thing. In some circles, folks say a piece of it separates from the part on the floor, and it punches through the roof and heads into the ceiling. Others say the dog thing punches into the roof and dangles like the Norris thing later did. They argue that Child's POV is looking up when he torches the creature. His aim seems to be at human height, so this supports that. I can go either way with this theory, because if a piece of the dog thing gets into the roof, it can easily explain how Blair is later infected. And a thing that supports this theory is that at the end of the movie, the Blair thing has a dog thing come out of it, thus suggesting that Blair was assimilated by this dog thing. However, one thing that doesn't support this is that if the creature fled, wouldn't there be a desperate search party made to kill and find this thing? How about you decide on this one? A very ironic, or not so ironic thing is who the first person is running in the kennel with the extinguisher. Well, what do you know? It's Palmer, who we know per the filmmakers is already a thing. And you have to wonder if he's instinctually putting out his buddy thing so it can survive from the flames. Norris follows him as well, though it's hard to know if he's a thing yet. He might just be infected, and he follows Palmer's lead. However, if he is a thing at this point fully, then how appropriate is it that the two possible things are the first ones to put the fire out on another thing that's burning?
Coincidence? I think not!
In the morning, Blair is autopsying the dog thing, and he is quickly coming to the realization that they are in serious trouble. He even cautiously questions Clark, and then MacReady takes Palmer and Norris out to the spaceship, where they discover the truth of what they're actually dealing with. Now, we know Palmer is with them, because John Carpenter stated it was him in the film commentary.
You and Hallahan and Clennon, off you go. I think Clennon's with you.
Now, if we believe the producer of the film, Palmer is a thing at this point. If this is the case, then Norris shouldn't be a thing, because if they were both a thing, would they not just jump MacReady and turn him into one as well? That would be difficult unless they brought extra clothes for MacReady to change into after the assault. However, all three could be things if you want to believe that MacReady was always a thing. But if that was the case, would they really bring back more information about what the thing is? The things would want to stay under the radar, and therefore they could say, we just found an ice block where the creature was dug up, and whatever they used the thermite on was destroyed. The storm is about to hit, and there is no way anyone could verify it until it would be too late. For me personally, I believe MacReady came back very human, but possibly infected. I also believe that Norris was infected virally at this point, and Palmer is a thing, just trying to stay under the radar. I have to say, I love the matte painting by Albert Whitlock. It might look dated to some, but I just love the old style of filmmaking. Now, my favorite track from the film, and the mood-defining moment of the movie for me, is when Wilford Brimley just inspects the computer with such a defeated look on his face. What a delivery, and the music is so very appropriate. So this brings us now to Blair's assimilation. I believe this scene is the last moment you see Blair as a human. So let's go through this. Firstly, Blair has been working non-stop. He's been autopsying Splitface and the dog for over 24 hours now. Now, Stuart Cohen stated in his blog that the filmmakers wanted Blair to change first. And that was one of the reasons Donald Pleasance wasn't cast. Blair needed to disappear in the background and then return at the end of the film, and Pleasance was already too recognizable. And they feared he would be missed too much and be a dead giveaway that Blair was a thing, so they purposely hired Wilford Brimley so he could be unassuming. From a storytelling standpoint, it was our intent that Blair be infected very early on in the proceedings and off-screen. Here, we were attempting to faithfully follow the dramatic line of the Campbell novella. We all liked the idea that his crack-up was a ruse, a clever feint to isolate himself, or itself, from the rest of the group. What this means is that after Blair came to the realization of what he was up against, he was absorbed. He was not sent out into a shack and sentenced to death by the other humans. Instead, the thing destroyed radios and vehicles to trap the crew of Outpost 31, so germs could most likely take their course, or to kill them directly in a more calculated manner. The Blair thing wanted to manipulate the others and close them off while isolating itself early so it could begin construction of its own escape plan, the vehicle at the end of the film. And for those fans who think Blair is the human hero who contained the thing in the Antarctic and saved the world, unfortunately, it's more sinister than that. Because when Cohen was asked directly if Blair was assimilated before the radio room incident, this is what he said with no reservations. Most definitely before. Now consider there's no reason why a thing would sit in front of a computer being disturbed at what it was, and then getting a useless gun to defend itself. Thus, Blair was assaulted physically after this point. That's why I say this is the last scene you see him as a human. However, he was definitely turned before the radio room. This is from the filmmakers, so if you have any angst about it, take it up with them. What this does is help realize the pure evil and malevolent nature of the thing, as it is completely cutting off all hope for the team. And the thing to remember is that Blair is not contained in that little shack. The creature gets out, getting parts to build its ship sneakily. That is a hell of a lot of tools and supplies beneath the shack, and I doubt it was all sitting in there when Blair arrived. So now we get to the Bennings assimilation, which is one of the few moments in the film that makes it clear when someone was changed. Even though I fully believe Bennings was already infected by the virus, he probably got too close, and the survival instincts of Splitface took a hold of him. We all know this creature is taken out pretty quickly, and then all the bodies in the place are burned, while Blair locks himself up in his room. But what he's really doing is sabotaging the vehicles. An important moment occurs in this scene, though, and it has to do with another debated topic, and that involves the keys Windows is carrying when he enters the room. The keys Windows is carrying is Gary's master keys for the facility that also access the blood that is later sabotaged. If you listen close, you will hear those keys drop after Windows sees the thing sucking on Bennings. As we end day 2, Blair, or the Blair thing, goes bonkers depending on how you want to interpret it. And this leads the base without vehicles, communication, or hope. And Norris or Palmer are things, depending on what you believe. Bennings is dead, and there's a good chance the majority left are virally infected by the thing. And I suppose this is a good point as any to cover the possibility that MacReady could be a thing as well. Now, we say this to respect those that definitively believe that MacReady is a thing from early on in the movie, and there are a lot of interesting ideas to support this, but there are also some things that ruin this theory, which I will go into later. I don't think MacReady got infected by germs in a bottle. If he did get infected, it would be more directly like Blair. This could have happened any time, even during the helicopter to the spaceship, as mentioned. The details of this theory go something like this. MacReady is established early on as a chess player, a tactician if you will, and therefore can think in terms of sacrificing pieces on a board to win a game. They show MacReady pouring alcohol down the computer and destroying it to get the upper hand when things go wrong. This is similar to how it is suggested MacReady infects others while he is a thing with his virus. For instance, when Blair is isolated, you can see MacReady grabbing Blair's bottle and drinking from it, then puts it right in front of him to drink later, suggesting MacReady is infecting him even though Blair is noted to already be a thing. At the end of the movie, he offers Childs a drink, therefore infecting him as well. The conclusion is that the drink MacReady is using throughout the film is a weapon, not only on the computer, but naive humans. So keep this theory in the back of your mind as we continue, because I'll bring up points that help and hurt this theory later. Day 3 starts the morning helping the Blair thing have its own space, and then Doc thinks up the blood test. It's here that Gary gives him the keys to the blood bank, and is there any surprise the blood is sabotaged? The question is, who sabotaged the blood? Well, at this point, it can only be Norris or Palmer. You can even argue that it's Blair who is just locked up in his shack and he's already free. Or all the theorists who are for MacReady being the thing the whole time. I can't fathom how any human would be a culprit, so the truth is, take your pick. But the thing I find most interesting about this scene is when Gary is pressed as to who uses his keys.
Nobody. I just give it to Copper whenever he needs it.
Now, Gary knew Windows had the keys before the doc, and yet Gary acts like he didn't let anyone have them. Gary is obviously fumbling from stress. But notice the change of Windows at that exact moment, because Windows would see this as a bold-faced lie or misdirection to the group from his leader, and this subsequently causes Windows to panic due to paranoia. It's an example of how subtle character motivation can be established in well-written, logical films. And you can see more character moments pulled out by using this scene, like when Clark goes after Childs for causing division. They almost go to blows.
Always hooked to your belt.
So now that there are trust issues, Gary, Copper, and Clark are tied up, and they are all human, which just shows how perfect the things are at manipulating the group. At the end of day 3, this line is said.
There's a storm hitting us in 6 hours. We're gonna find out who's who.
And this leaves us into day 4. And on that day, not a thing happens. Everybody is tied up, and everybody holds up in the rec room. Now, some of the first lines we hear on day 5 establish that nothing happened at all on day 4. They have basically been weathering the storm, and not a lot of people are sleeping.
The storm's been hitting us hard now for 48 hours.
But then the only flaw occurs in this movie, in my opinion. While everyone is in the rec room, Fuchs is alone at his desk, all the way over here in this room, researching. He's an easy target to be assimilated. And where's MacReady? Well, he's all the way over here in this room. Who the hell would go away from the herd in this situation? They're braver than me. Now, despite these two being off alone at this time, this film is extremely believable, as the people in this movie act like real people, trying their best to work with the situation with the best information they have. The reality of this movie is a huge strength, and the methodology displayed by the characters and the creature really sucks you into the psychological tension of this film. If MacReady is a thing, why is he making a tape about its kind to help expose it? Well, it's either a perfect copy, and it doesn't know it's a thing, or it's being tactical. So if someone arrives, he can say, "Look, I was going to tell the world I'm a good guy." Or he's human. Which one is right? Well, you pick. This movie is so effing brilliant. It's rock solid from every avenue. Now, when the power goes out, the person walking by Fuchs is never identified in the movie. I always thought the shadow was Blair because he should be the only thing on the loose unless you believe MacReady's the thing. I say Blair specifically because listen to the music track as the shadow walks by.
Who's that?
Now listen to this track when Blair appears later to kill Gary. What do you know? They're alike. Truthfully, everyone should be in the rec room hunkering down in paranoia. I can't fathom why MacReady and Fuchs are so cavalier to be by themselves. Something is faking being human around them, and it could be anyone. Why be alone at all? Everyone should eat, sleep, smoke, drink, or fart in the same room. And look, there's a restroom right by this room. It's a perfect confined area. And when someone leaves the room, it should be with two others to be safe. The original script, where they made rules that no one could be away from the herd for over 20 minutes, was very logical in context to these solo moments. I understand that these scenes are needed for exposition, and I don't hate these scenes. It just takes away from some of the tension when you see these guys alone. On a side note, the folks who think MacReady is always the thing throughout the movie believe the shadow passing by Fuchs is MacReady, because now that Fuchs has told him that everyone should be germaphobes for safety's sake, needs to be silenced. So he leads Fuchs outside, away from the rec room, so no one can hear Fuchs being dealt with. As for who killed Fuchs, we don't know. Again, you can take your pick. But if I was anyone in the rec room who was staying by everyone else, the main suspect would be MacReady or Blair. Was anyone else crazy enough to be walking around alone? Fuchs seeing shredded MacReady clothes means one or two things. MacReady is either a thing, or Fuchs stumbled into items the Thing was planning to use to set up MacReady. I think Fuchs found it before the Thing could utilize the items for its plan. Nothing more, nothing less. It wouldn't make sense for the Thing to have Fuchs find such things and then kill him on purpose. But again, I could be wrong. For those who believe MacReady is the Thing, it would work that Fuchs finds his clothes, and that's when MacReady kills him. Then MacReady runs his clothes to his shack, hides them, and then turns on the light to create a ruse to draw them to his shack later, after he assembles the search parties. And an interesting thing is, if MacReady is the Thing, and he doesn't tell everyone about germs, picking Knowles next is perfect, because he makes all their food. Then, Knowles would find the shredded clothes, luckily, and get away before MacReady could assimilate him. It's a sound theory. I can't fault it. Now, there's no way to tell who killed Fuchs. Again, pick, and it will work. And that's why we're still talking about it 40 plus years later. I love the Hangman's Noose by Blair. It's hilarious. Hey everybody, I'm fine. Let me back inside, even though I have a noose next to me. I'm perfectly sane. Really. Clearly, this is the Thing manipulating others by saying one thing but showing something else. Now, there's a healthy debate as to how these things work. Do they know they are things? Do they know who else is a thing? Do they have a connection with each other? For instance, does Palmer know what Blair is doing and vice versa, like a hive mind? Or are they separate entities? It is stated that the things are such perfect copies that they have inherited human paranoia, and therefore can't trust each other as well. I can't say if any of this is true or not, because even the actors debated this constantly, with no conclusions. In this movie, we see things turn on things, or use other things as distractions, like when Palmer calls out the spider thing. no thing ever comes to the aid of another, whether it's Palmer helping the dog thing or the Norris thing. Blair didn't aid Palmer either, and if MacReady is the thing, well, that would fit, considering such facts. I always imagined the thing like the most selfish and careless entity alive, only concerned with its own survival, and everything around it was a threat, and therefore just kills everything instinctually, even other things. But if you know this channel, you know we like diversity of thought here, so often I'll watch the film with completely different views from time to time. One thing to also consider, if these things are perfect copies right down to the brain patterns, could the things have the traits of the beings they inhabit? The dog thing was threatened, and what do dogs do if they can't run? Well, they attack, like the dog thing did. Palmer went with the flow as a human and thing, and the creature even smoked pot just like the human. When Knowles accuses MacReady of being a thing, Norris is either really feeling concern or he's acting wonderfully. Blair is the anomaly, though. He went from concern for the world to planning on its destruction, so one must draw their own conclusions. Whatever you think, the Norris thing is pretty shocking, gross, and great. I love when Palmer does his line, but is he betraying its own kind? Maybe, but he doesn't say anything until after Windows is staring at it too, so ponder that. Besides Knowles, Clark was one of my favorite characters in the film, so when he died I was a bit bummed. But I guess it's better he died this way than freeze to death or turn into a thing, so I guess he got off easy. Richard Masur had this to say about his death.
I'm going to answer the question once and for all. Clark is the thing. Because what they never tell you in the film, it's kind of a cheat, is that the entity has the ability to hide in a dead body for an infinite period of time. So when Clark is shot, he withdraws himself from the blood test. So are you actually buying any of this?
If you've heard some of the theories, that sounds just crackpot.
It could work.
Yeah.
It could work. But it's not, John wasn't clever enough to come up with it.
The blood test is the only scene with the spark of light in the eyes done on purpose, and it is an awesome sequence. For the ones that are for MacReady being a thing throughout the film, they say this whole blood test was rigged. They state multiple reasons how MacReady could fake his own blood test off-screen, which is fine, but the film shows us everything opposite of that. Logically, there is no way everyone would not be watching everyone suspiciously. The scrutiny of every moment or movement in that room would be deeper than any debate we film fans have. Just put yourself in that situation. In order to buy that the blood test was cheated, you have to ignore any sincerity the filmmakers had. And I have to say, John Carpenter is no Rian Johnson looking to subvert you. He doesn't just make movies to pull a fast one. Also, if you respect Dean Cundy's intentions, then everyone but Palmer was clearly a human, because he purposefully lit the scene with only Palmer singled out to be the thing. Regardless, when you see MacReady testing Palmer's blood, you can notice that the hand holding the dish is a fake one. Once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Sorry. Another thing is that no one is wearing gloves to protect themselves, which is a good case that MacReady didn't warn anyone about germs. Obviously, as nervous and frightened as this character was, he would have instantly obeyed any germ warning for fear of death. I do have one question about Palmer's blood. Did it run to Palmer, or did it run somewhere and hide? Because if it ran, this blood could survive at the end of the film somewhere. It's possible. Just saying. When Windows is attacked by the Palmer thing, notice his hands are being consumed by the creature the same time his head is. That's just gross. The funny thing is, if MacReady is the thing, he tests the weakest human, then 2 dead ones, and then another thing. And conveniently, MacReady's flamethrower doesn't work and allows the other thing to kill windows. That seems pretty suspect and works for the theory, but it can easily be debated that it was just a horror movie moment. Guess what I'm going to say now? Yeah, that's right. You have to decide. I am always struck by the performances in this film. When Windows is thrown and the others are full of panic, focus on T.K. Carter. You can actually see Null sympathetic and almost tearful of the situation, making him all the more reason he's a very relatable character for many, like myself. This moment during the blood test really damages MacReady being a thing. Despite all the little things debated, the big problem of this moment is when a thing is killing Windows. If MacReady is the thing, every human is currently tied up on the couch. Windows is now being turned into a thing. Blair is a thing. If MacReady is a thing, they are all in control right now. Every human is a docile target. MacReady's one. Yet instead, MacReady burns both Windows and Palmer, and then tests and frees the humans to continue the game. That does not correlate. The only thing that does correlate if MacReady is a thing is that the creature has no loyalty towards any other. I like this idea because this makes the species way more dangerous and violent. But in the end, a house divided against itself always falls, which could be the case at the end of this movie. So now we come to the tracking shot in the base, eerily similar to when the dog was searching for a target, but this time the thing theme is prevalent. There are theories out there about the clothes and shoes rearranged, but this could be a bad continuity error, or most likely a struggle, and the aftermath was cleaned up. Another clue is the door. Here we have a before and after picture of the room Childs is in. Notice this door is now open. It is debated that Childs looked sleepy, and MacReady snuck up on him and surprised him in this shot. Then MacReady takes the others, and this scene might suggest that Childs dozed off at his position. Could Childs have been approached from behind after nodding off? Maybe, but he could have been easily awake too in such a case. We have seen that Blair later kills Gary without leaving a bloody mess, so the same could have been done with Childs. There is talk about the color of Childs' coat later in the film, changing from the blue one you see, but more common versions of the film have corrected that, and this is what Stuart Cohen said about this. I think it's the same coat, but I don't believe there was anything specifically planned by John to indicate identity at the end. The scene was reworked so many different times in editing in order to save it from being entirely cut that anything that arises was probably accidental. So if you respect the filmmakers and don't dismiss their thoughts, the coat was not the focus. Moving on. So why then would Childs leave a secure position that is defendable unless he was crazy, which Childs could be? But think about the logic here. Childs walks out, and within 16 seconds the power goes out. So Blair was clearly downstairs with the generator at that moment. Childs did not see Blair outside unless it can teleport, which it didn't. Now, if you believe that Blair assimilated Childs, this works. Blair shows up while the others are finding his ship, assimilates Childs, deals with the generator, while the new Childs comes to and heads outside. Why would a new thing head outside? Well, it makes sense. If Blair doesn't survive, it can freeze, or at least survive a final assault. It's plausible, more plausible than Childs walking out into a deadly storm, chasing a shadow that he's not sure about, which that very shadow could sneak up from any direction. In realistic terms, if he was human, his actions would make no sense. So I find it hard to accept that he is human at the end of the film. So our 3 remaining heroes decide to go for all or nothing and start blasting everything. The effect of Knowles throwing dynamite into rooms was done by him throwing a fake stick into a room, and then a type of cannon fired to simulate an explosion as he walked on. T.K. Carter stated he could feel the heat, and if he didn't move quickly, he would have been barbecue. While filming the scene where Brimley was killing Moffat, he was so menacing, and John Carpenter was impressed by his delivery. He asked Wilford Brimley what he was thinking as they did the take, and Wilford's response was simple: picking up my laundry. Noel's death was actually storyboarded, and as you can see here, he would first see Gary's feet, and the Thing would then ambush him. At the end of the film, the Blair Thing is just huge, and you have to wonder, how the hell could he have obtained so much mass? Perhaps the Blair Thing includes the mass of Knowles, Gary, and possibly the dog thing from the beginning. After blowing up the Thing, MacReady somehow survives this awesome explosion. Yet what we see instead is MacReady surviving, and he comes out with a blanket and a bottle of J&B that he scrounged up. Theorists state that the bottle Kurt holds is actually a Molotov cocktail without the cloth in it, and then he gives it to Childs to drink, and when Childs doesn't react to the liquid, MacReady chuckles, knowing he's a thing. But this is nothing but conjecture, and if you believe this theory, you have to believe that Childs isn't a perfect imitation with no working taste buds. So I always believed MacReady was going to have a victory drink before freezing to death. But once again, I think we need to take into account the filmmaker's focus on liquor bottles throughout the film. From beginning to end, there are bottles center screen, like they are actors themselves, and it was done for a reason. Question is, for what reason? And I'll tell you, it's not for product placement, because John Carpenter isn't a commercial director or a sellout. He's an independent director. I'm sure he got money for product placement in this movie, but that wasn't the main motivation for how he shoots his film. So now we're up to the last question. Is it Childs or MacReady? Are there two things, no things, or a human and a thing? So what do the filmmakers say? Well, on November 23rd, 2012, John Carpenter stated that one of the characters at the end of the film was a thing. Yes, one of them was a thing. Other times, Carpenter stated he doesn't care, and he's even said, I don't know, MacReady was the thing. I'm just bullshitting about MacReady being a thing. At the end, I have no idea. Nobody does. The two actors were told to do the scene in countless ways, and Keith David said he was told to act as a thing and as a human. There were many discussions about this scene, and in the end, even Russell had a hand in some of the dialogue. It was he who wrote the final line of the movie.
Why don't we just wait here for a little while? See what happens.
It is also public record that screenwriter Bill Lancaster stated that both men were human at the end. Producer Stuart Cohen also shares this view. Keith David says he's not the thing, while Kurt Russell has wondered if John intended him to be the thing. So honestly, the filmmakers don't help anyone with conclusions. So we have established the bottle, the coat, the breath, and the gleam in the eye are not definitive tells for this scene. If Childs was a thing, and MacReady was human, would it not just torch him and be the last one standing? Also, if Childs is human, he is very reactionary, and as established in the film, morally ambiguous in a life or death situation.
Childs! What if we're wrong about him? Why then we're wrong?
So it equally stands to reason that a human Childs might do the same, rather than risk the danger. On the same note, if Childs was a thing, would it risk contact with a human who is freezing, who may have a stick of dynamite or fire-based weapons that could kill it? Would a Childs thing just not find a spot out of sight and freeze to death, to be found by rescuers whenever they would arrive? The theory that Childs drinking from a bottle exposes him as a thing also doesn't work completely, because if MacReady was a thing, who's to say anyone at the base was told about the germs? Because that conversation would have died with Fuchs if MacReady was a thing then. So he could be human and unwittingly drink from the bottle if that's the case. It really proves nothing. However, if MacReady is human and gives him the bottle and he's warned everybody about germs, then it would be relevant. The point is, we just don't know. There's a good chance both men are human at the end, victorious heroes who save the world, but both men's answers are suspect. When asked where Childs was, he said he thought he saw Blair seconds after the generator goes out. And when MacReady is asked if he killed the Thing, he deflects the question, as if some thing might still be alive.
Did you kill it? Where were you, Childs?
There was also a third alternate ending, and that was to have MacReady in McMurdo, shivering with his blanket, awaiting a blood test. There would be no Childs, and the film would end right there. It was filmed in Rob Bottin's effects building, after the Stewart, British Columbia location, and pretty much discarded for the ambiguous ending. There are few films out there that break the mold, and The Thing is one of them. Most ambiguous moments in movies are due to lazy writing, but this film's ambiguities are so logical, so thought out, that most theories can be healthily debated ad nauseum. Another thing that broke the mold was the standard of don't show too much violence or effects. And this film throws it in your face. Even the goo dripping behind the Norris thing in the wall. It's positively inspired execution and a faithful tale that honors the original story that came out over 80 years ago. It's a masterpiece, and it is in my top 5 horror movies of all time. After the release and inevitable box office failure, the studio started the VHS rollout, and this time there was a lot more promotional material for the film than when it was in theaters. With this new awareness, audiences began renting the movie, and suddenly, with the advent of having distance from E.T., audiences looked at the film differently, and masses began revering the film with a strong following. This would compound over the years, and today, it's one of the most debated movies out there because of its genius style. And I wanted to take a moment to single out one of those channels, which is called Dalwhinnie. When I was doing research, going over everything on the internet about The Thing, I found this channel and I found it quite informative. Check it out if you're a fan of the movie. They have interviews and breakdowns of the film. The Thing would eventually continue in the form of a comic, which John Carpenter blessed as canon during 1991 and 1992. MacReady and Childs would be rescued just in time, but there was a Thing still alive, and in the end, Childs would die to kill the creature, and MacReady would end up stuck in the middle of nowhere to freeze and die. It was a fun read, and The Thing would continue in August 2002 in the form of a PlayStation 2 Xbox game called The Thing. This game completely ignored the comics and shows Childs frozen to death when a rescue team arrives at Outpost 31. The game has some canon-changing things by saying things can copy clothes too, and has MacReady returning in a helicopter to save the player in a final boss fight. It's a tense and fun game. I loved playing it. If I ever get enough money, I want to get it again. This one is a game I could play over and over again without end, just like my Resident Evil games. The problem with these two products is that they contradict each other, and therefore the acceptance of one or the other as canon has caused a split in opinions. Some die-hard folks cite that these are relevant to the film's ending, and others shun such thoughts. As for me, I like to explore the films with differing perspectives if possible when viewing them, to find depth, no matter what canon you subscribe to. So I'm not butthurt with either take. After the game came out, Carpenter had an interview in Empire magazine during 2004. He said there was a Thing 2 idea, which picked up right after the first Thing, where both Childs and Mac both survived, with frostbite damage to disguise their age, and they would struggle to survive until a rescue team arrived. He also would go on to state that the 2002 game was currently the continuation of canon, in which Russell survived and Childs froze to death, thus changing his tune about the comics. Shortly after this interview, in 2005, the Sci-Fi Channel announced they were making a direct sequel to The Thing in the form of a miniseries, helmed by producer Frank Darabont and written by David Leslie Johnson. The series would take place in 2005, and Russians would find Outpost 31, where MacReady and Childs are frozen. They salvage the alien spacecraft and find a piece of the Thing on board, and things run afoul quickly. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your view, this miniseries did not come to fruition. The 2011 The Thing prequel did try to honor the 1982 film, and I greatly appreciate their efforts with that move. I thought the idea about metal fillings and earrings was quite intelligent, and many cite that Childs wasn't a thing because of that addition to canon. They tried very hard to connect the dots methodically to the 1982 film, and the effects were looking pretty good, but then they used CGI to gloss over all the hard work ADI did, and the film was diminished quite a bit because of that. There is a lot more to say about this one, and maybe I will cover it someday, but not anytime soon. Give your thoughts in the comments below how you feel about us tackling it. I might put it on my to-do list. The bottom line with the prequel is that it had to live up to the 1982 The Thing. Therefore, it couldn't stand up against such expectations, and truthfully, the characters in that movie are very stereotyped, and they are not as believable and interesting as what was in Carpenter's film. When the remake was announced, some of the cast were not receptive to it. Thomas G. Waits was mad and stated his view towards the remake was, "How dare they?" There are other things I haven't discussed about the 1982 Thing, like the chessboard having strange continuity moves early in the film, or the board game of The Thing, and so on. At some point, I had to cut back as there just was too much to cover with this one, like Superman. It's a contained story in a contained environment, locked in 1982, but regardless of being dated, it is now timeless, as if it had happened long ago, far away. And it's just as real for viewers today as it was when it came out. When I saw the film in 1984, it was amazing. And as a boy, there were no horror films beyond Alien that scared me. When I saw The Thing, the psychological aspects are really what sucked me into the movie. And it actually made me jump. It was also the movie that made me want to learn about John Carpenter as a 12-year-old boy. Whenever a movie came out of his from then on, I always tried to see it in theaters if I could afford it, just like Steven Spielberg films. I didn't make it to see all of his movies, and I always wished I had seen They Live in the Theaters, which is one I missed. And we will cover that one someday on this channel. And that'll end this series for The Thing. I know our journey through The Thing has been a little dark at times, but I want to leave it on a very positive note. I want you to go back in time and remember what stars used to be like. And for that, I offer Wilford Brimley.
I owe you, the audience, a great debt. And I'd like to take this opportunity to humbly express my love for you and my gratitude to you. You've allowed me to make a living. I always thought it was stealing. But here we go, and I mean, I love you people.
And support us on Patreon if you think we're worthy. We can use all the help we can get. And by being a member, you get to see our videos a week earlier than everyone else. If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps. So does sharing.